everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and today we have the biggest news that we have ever gotten in this war so far, and I am absolutely stoked to tell it to y'all, so I hope y'all are excited as well, because this has been the biggest news that we've ever gotten in the entire 38 days of this war. Moving beyond that, I'm just so excited I really can't get the words out for it even. But I thank y'all all so much for coming. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties we had at the start, and so let's go over the schedule for tonight. The first thing we'll do is we'll cover the Northern Front, or what's left of it, or what doesn't even exist of it anymore. And then we're going to move on to the Eastern Front, and in between the Northern and Eastern Fronts, we're going to take about 3 to 5 questions from the chat. We'll then move on to cover all the news from the Eastern Front, where the good news just keeps on going. We will then move on to the Southern Front. In between the Eastern and Southern Fronts, we'll be answering 3 to 5 questions from the chat again, and then we'll cover all the news from the Southern Front, and then move on to the international news, because we've had some in the United States and some in Russia. I once again want to thank you all for the support. I can't believe that we've made it to this day where we've actually seen news like this come out. And so, without further ado, without sitting here and talking about it too much, here is the news. The Ukrainians have declared that they have liberated the entirety of the Kyiv Oblast today. This includes the pocket that I showed yesterday. It includes the Chernobyl area and the Ovruch area. It includes all of it. It has all been liberated. The Russians are no longer exist in any of these areas, according to the Ukrainian government. Here's the exact marker that talks about that. Their CBS News did report on the story. They said they haven't been able to confirm it, but considering that we've seen a load of videos, and I'll show you all these here in a second, of Ukrainians just driving through priorly Russian-controlled areas without even taking fire, and they just get to look at the entire situation as it went down, we know for sure that the Russians have dissolved north of Kyiv. They've either withdrawn back into Belarus, they've been pushed back into Belarus, or a combination of both, or they have literally just dissolved. I don't think they've dissolved, though. That's something that would be unheard of. And also, that would be a huge deal if they did. So I think it's really a combination of the former two. Their withdrawal into Belarus to 20%, I guess followed by the remaining 80%, as well as the Ukrainians and their fierce resistance pushing them and driving them back out. So, that being said, we're now going to move on to all the news that we can see from the liberated areas around Kyiv. Now, this is amazing stuff, y'all. We have literally watched history happen overnight. Last night, we saw that the Ukrainians actually punched through from the Ivankiv area to the Dnieper reservoir, and I said that this was going to be a huge deal. And now today we can see that apparently the Russians just have ceased to exist north of Kyiv. Now, this information is something that it's crazy. It's insane. And I know that if the Ukrainians are reporting this and stating this, they're not going to be stating propaganda, because how in the world would you explain today the Russians are completely gone of northern Kyiv and then tomorrow say there's fighting in the Bucha, Hostomel, Irpin area? You can't. So apparently they are gone. Of course, in the coming days, if this information turns out to be untrue, then I'm going to have to start giving the Ukrainians an arm's length approach to their reporting and information. But so far, we have no reason to discount Ukrainian government reports of what's going on in the war. And so, with that being said, we're now going to get to the video evidence that we've seen today, as the Ukrainians have just started to roll through the areas that were formerly Russian-controlled, and now they control them. The first bit we've seen is that the VDV was wiped out once more. Apparently some portion of a BTG trying to cross the Irpin floodplain. I'm going to show this to y'all right now. As you can see, just more BMD-4s wiped out. Looks like they were trying to move through the floodplain, and it looks like they failed. There's no way the Russians can rebound from this kind of stuff anymore. Considering that their main 2 objectives in this war was Kharkiv and Kyiv, and now it looks like they've completely had to abandon Kyiv, and I think Kharkiv will be soon to follow, considering that the Ukrainian counterattacks in that area have had so much progress. I just don't think that we're going to see the Russians win. I mean, like, they failed their first objectives, their actual objectives, which was besieging Kyiv and Kharkiv, didn't achieve either of them, and now they've withdrawn from the northern area completely, or they've been pushed out by the Ukrainians. We haven't gotten the official story. I believe that the Ukrainians are saying that they pushed them out. Not exactly sure, though. So we're going to wait on some more information as to how this went down, and then I'll try and report on that. But as of right now, we know that the Kyiv area has been liberated, and this is huge news. This is amazing. So here we can see another BMD-4 style tank. I'm not really sure if it has a turret on top of it, but you can see that they were completely abandoned near the floodplain. It's good stuff to see. It's wonderful. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news where we can see more captured Russian equipment. Here we have a T-72B. In the next picture, it appears that we have some kind of MTLB variant. And then lastly, oh, I'm sorry, apparently this is a 1V14 M1 battery command post, and I'm not exactly sure where the MTLB variant is. But interesting nonetheless, and it's good to see that the Ukrainians have once again captured more Russian equipment, and it looks like they'll be keeping this for a while, and they won't have to worry about trying to keep it, because as far as we know, the Russians are completely gone north of Kyiv now, and this is great news. So we're now going to move on to a bit of patriotic fervor at the airport, where we can see a group of Ukrainian soldiers standing in front of the burned out Antonov, having actually retaken the airport. This is no longer drone footage, and this is no longer just camera work. Here is a group of Ukrainian soldiers standing on the very tarmac that the Russians seized on February 24th, holding the Ukrainian flag. This is something that is amazing. This is one of those victories that you can say is the turning point of the war, considering that Hostomel was so heavily contended at the start. Wonderful stuff to see. I love it. It's great. And so now we're going to move on to the next videos, where, of course, while there's been nothing but joyous news today, as the Ukrainians have now liberated the entire Kyiv Oblast, there was some unfortunate news to come out of the Bucha pocket, as the Ukrainians finally cleared it of its last Russian resistance today, and started to see the actual fact of what the Russians have been doing there. The Russians, in the process of occupying the Bucha Hostomel European area, appear to have tied civilians' hands behind their backs and shot them in the streets. There are loads of them in this footage, and so I'm going to have to show this to y'all. It's very graphic. I'm going to warn y'all of that in advance. There are bodies in this video, but here's the video. I'm just going to let y'all see it for yourselves and let y'all know that this is hardcore evidence that the Russians have committed war crimes on a scale that's similar to an ethnic cleansing. So here's the video. And you see hands tied behind his back. Man killed on his bicycle. Another civilian killed in the street. And two more. You could see that one right there clearly had their hands tied behind their back. I'm not going to rewind it and show it, but y'all can rewind it yourselves. And you can see clearly in that video that they had tied his hands behind his back with some kind of white cloth and executed him where he was. Now, that is a war crime if I've ever seen one. There's no way you can refute or even deny now that the Russians are not committing war crimes openly and blatantly. That is a clear example of it. This is terrible. What can there be said about this at this point? I've said that the Russian army is a bunch of barbarians, and I believe at this point there's no other way to look at them rather than what they are. They have executed civilians on the middle of a road and tied their hands behind their back. So this wasn't any artillery strike that they could claim that was poorly aimed. This wasn't a cruise missile strike where they could say it was just collateral from hitting a military strategic target. No, this was clearly executions on the part of the Russian army. They found out these civilians, had them tied, and then shot them. That is evidence of war crimes, clear evidence. And I believe that the Ukrainians should begin to round up these Russian officers that they are accusing of committing these war crimes, have their trials immediately, and sentence them to execution as soon as possible, because these kinds of war crimes are not to be accepted in a modern world. This is an attack on civilization itself, and it's almost a new kind of Holocaust or a pogrom in a way. It's like they came in here and started ethnically cleansing Ukrainians in the Bucha Irpin area. This is sickening. And the fact that the Western world is sitting by and mostly watching this at this point is kind of sad, but I can understand where Western governments are coming from. But I feel like at this point we should step in, and seeing now that we have clear evidence that they're actually singling out civilians and executing them in the middle of the street, we should start being a lot more open and clear about our intent if the Russians don't stop this war soon. And I'll get to the news about that here in a bit. But you could see there that was infuriating, and I hope that y'all are as angry about that as I am, because that is insane that the Russians have actually committed blatant war crimes that you can tell were war crimes on film. We're now going to move on to the next bit of video where we can actually see these Russian forces being wiped out by some kind of Ukrainian police force. Good stuff to see, considering that some of these people are probably war criminals. As we can see, they're now moving down the street of Bucha. You can see the destroyed vehicles. It appears that they're inspecting the Ram truck.
Хлопці, дивіться, вони жили в тому домі, мабуть,
Вони в школі
днів
були,
5, от, у тому
в
домі жили,
академії спорту.
в школі і в академії спорту, потім отут, де СТО, жили. І у нас по сусідству, воно де дом з башнею.
As we can see, they're now clearing the road again of vehicles. I'm assuming that these are domestically built Ukrainian MRAPs of a sort, and it appears that these are actually pretty large, even compared to a Russian Tiger in a way. So I'm going to let the video continue. We can see them using a normal police van and moving alongside it down the road.
Людям треба буде якась допомога чи що, скажіть, що ми будемо і там, і будемо тут.
Now we can see them talking to Ukrainian civilians.
Спасибо.
I would like to make a note real quick on stream. It appears that we're facing some kind of DDoS attack at the moment. So if this message does go through on the stream, we are just trying to persevere through. We don't know if the stream will go down, but it appears at the moment that the future of the stream is a little uncertain. So please bear with us, everyone. We're trying to just get through it. Hopefully we don't get DDoSed into oblivion here. You know, I guess we've pissed off some people in the Russian government, but nonetheless, we're going to continue to try and report the news as much as we can for however long we can. So we're going to let this video continue. So we can see here they're now consulting more Ukrainian citizens.
Дякую вам за все, хлопці.
Так, це національна поліція, є швидка допомога, якби комусь було треба, кажіть.
Добре, добре,
кажіть.
дякую, дякую.
Кажіть.
Дякую, за все дякую і уклін вам великий, хлопці.
Все,
За все дякую.
Буде щось потрібно, підходь.
Дякую, дякую.
Now we can see them checking out another van. It appears that the resistance they're facing is actually incredibly light, considering that the Russian forces that are left hardly exist at all. And I think that's why we're getting DDoSed, is because the Russians apparently are so scared of the information getting out that they almost completely collapsed north of Kyiv, that they're going to try and shut down the stream in a way, or DDoS YouTube entirely. I'm not exactly sure which one it is at the moment. We are getting information from some of the people who are working behind the scenes telling us that we are currently being DDoSed at the moment. So if everyone could just please, once again, stay patient with us. We are trying to carry on through this stream the best we can, but nonetheless, the Russians do things every once in a while, like attacks on our Discord, you know, by setting up Russian plants that are in the server for a week or two, and now it looks like they're trying to directly attack the streams through some kind of DDoS, as far as I'm being told. So everyone, please be patient once again. I'm going to skip through this video a little bit and move on through it. Here we can see them talk to another Ukrainian civilian, and it appears that they were trying to stow an artillery shell there.
Бивший поліцейський, а другий існуючий жив. Ну наші ж здали, бо вони конкретно йшли до нас в під'їзд. І у сусіда син в ЗСУ служить. Його хату вирвали. Зайшли в 5:30 ранку в підвал, почали гупати, типу, ми не будемо нікого стріляти, піднімайте руки, виходіть, обшмонали весь підвал. Кажемо, у нас тільки бабушки залишилися. Я один молодий і Андрюха. А то, кажу, 5 бабушок, один інвалід, типу.
We're not going to skip through the interview. It's somewhat lengthy, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to get it translated. We can see here, oh my god, this looks like it was a civilian that was crushed inside of his car. It looks like, I'm not really sure how, but one can only assume, since it doesn't look like it was actually blown up, it looks like a tank may have run over this car while this guy was in it and killed him. You know, once again, more evidence of a war crime. I'm just going to leave that at that. We're now going to move on from this. We can now see the police moving on down the street. It appears past the supermarket.
Слава Богу, живі. Слава Богу, дякуємо, що знайшли наші, хоч армія наша.
We're now going to skip forward a little bit more. It appears that they're starting to use a drone. A civilian drone, as a matter of fact, it looks like.
Понимаю, це воно. Під застройку. Коптер далеко, сигнал.
Потихеньку продивляйся повністю квадрат за квадратом, поки є заряд.
Now we're going to skip forward a little bit more. We can see a burned out BMP-2. Good to see. We can also see what appeared to be maybe some kind of package that the Russian army is using. I know it's probably not an MRE. It doesn't look like the same kind of box, but some kind of package. I'll just leave it at that. And finally, we can see more damage that the Russians have caused to the Bucha area. And then the video is rounded out with an interview. But we will cut the video a little bit short because we don't know at the moment exactly what they're saying. So we're now going to move on to the next two bits of news we've seen come out of the country today. Well, the Kyiv area. which we have seen once again more Russian tanks being destroyed near the Kyiv area. Check this out.
This is
One BMP-2, two BMP-2, another BMP-2,
left of
a T-72B3, another T-72B3.
Russian tanks we just found here close to Kiev.
Another T-72B3. That's 3 BMP-2s and 3 T-72B3s most likely.
This was a fierce battle just 2 days ago. You see the V, the sign for the Russian tanks, for the Russian invasion, and Vladimir Putin wanted these tanks we are just filming to be inside Kiev, inside the center, but they were stopped by Ukrainian military here, and you see the total destruction of these tanks, and that's what actually happened to many places close to Kiev. That's the victory of the Ukrainian army and the defeat of the Russians.
And so with that video, you can see once again the Ukrainians were flooring the Russians before they completely got pushed back or dissolved here in northern Kyiv. And that is once again a great thing to know, that the Russians just simply no longer exist up here in this area of the country, and that Kyiv is no longer under any kind of direct or imminent threat of being a battleground for the Russians. We're now going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten from the Northern Front today before we move to Chernihiv, which is the damage that was caused in Borodyanka. I'm just going to show you all this video. It speaks for itself.
Смотри, ужас. Русский мир. Русский мир. Хотят так же самое, чтобы как у них в Иркутске было, блядь. Показать, как ваши пидорасы у нас мирных нахуй не убивают. А потом.
As you can see, the damage has been very extensive. Not as extensive as some areas we've seen in the country, but nonetheless the damage is present. You can see in this building it was destroyed, the middle of it was completely destroyed. That's pretty on par with a location like Mariupol, where most of the buildings are in that shape. But the good news to know is that while the city was damaged heavily, they will never be threatened by Russian troops again, probably throughout the entirety of the rest of this war, and maybe for many years to come, as they just cease to exist in the Northern Front. They're not here anymore. I mean, that's incredible. I was thinking, I wonder how long it's going to take them to push the Russians off the E40, and now today we've gotten news that the entire Kyiv Oblast has been liberated of the Russian troops. And we were getting the information last night that the Russians had withdrawn completely out of Chernobyl. The Ukrainians had pushed from Ivankiv to the Dnieper Reservoir, effectively cutting the Russian front in two. And now we know that they have been pushed back out of the country, or have entirely retreated today, which is incredible news. That's amazing. So we're now that we've covered all the news here in Kyiv, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news in the Chernihiv area, where we can see some pictures of captured Russian equipment. Here we can see an SPG. We can then see another SPG somewhere else. It appears to be kind of in the woods. Another SPG somewhere else in the woods. This one has a different camouflage scheme than the last one, so we know that it is a different kind of SPG. Well, a different SPG, not a different variant of it. And then finally, in the last video, we can see a BTR-82 that's apparently missing some of its forward wheels, but it looks entirely operational nonetheless. So I'm sure that they can get this thing working and actually use it as a capture vehicle, and the Ukrainians will get a decent amount of use out of it. So I'm very glad to see that the Ukrainians just keep on making unparalleled progress here in the Northern Front. And so finally, the last thing we've got, which may show that some people are correct, or it may show that this is what the Russians are planning. We've seen a train set out from Gomel today heading south with Russian tanks on it. So I'm going to show you all this video, and this may suggest that they're actually repositioning these units that are now not in the northern Ukraine area, somewhere else around the country, or maybe they're leaving the theater altogether. And so there we have it right there. I don't really know what we could get out of that. It'd be nothing more than assumptions at this point. Maybe they're moving them entirely out of the theater and they'll no longer be in the Ukraine war at all. Maybe they're being returned back to their depots of origin inside of Russia, or maybe they're being moved down to help the attacks and war in kind of down in the Eastern Front. Not entirely sure. We'll just have to wait for the coming days to see what actually happens from that. So with that being said, we have one last bit of news that I'm going to include in the Northern Front today, where we can see a Ukrainian soldier, and this is a very touching thing. This specific Ukrainian soldier actually liberated his parents' house in Novobasan and actually met them. So I'm going to let y'all see this video. It's a very sweet little thing. And so here it is.
Хорошо. Здравствуйте.
Все хорошо.
Все хорошо.
Хлопчики,
Да, все.
спасибо вам, спасибо
все
вам.
хорошо.
Як ви молилися за вас у погребі. Ой, синуляточку, синочку.
Все добре. Все добре. Що, ви съїсти, що?
Конечно,
Ні,
Мы не голодные, мы вам привезли.
Пишите,
Якісь
успокойтесь.
консерви.
Мы привезли.
у нас є
Є
все.
все,
Да, хліб даже сьогодні
А вода
прибрали.
есть? Кому-то надо
Вода
завести,
есть?
чтобы вы знаете, кому надо еду завести. Тут по селу кому-то. Мы вам привезли как раз еды.
Ви знаєте, може, отам старенькі люди, вони сьогодні гуманітарку не получили хліб хіба.
Вас муки
немає, случайно.
Мука есть. Сейчас макаронов мы привезли.
Муки нема.
Есть мука, есть, Дима.
А, есть?
Есть, да.
Идемте
Ой,
туда.
ви знаєте, хлопчики, сьогодні
Isn't that such a sweet video? I mean, like, you know, those parents are going to have a very high regard for their son for the rest of their lives, thinking that their boy actually liberated their town that they're in. I mean, like, you know, it's almost like having a knight in shining armor in your own family come to save the day. And so I know that they're incredibly happy for that, and I'm moved by that, to put it in the best words I can. That was something very sweet, and it's nice to see that the Ukrainian soldiers are liberating their own families in some places, and it's just a wonderful thing. That's all I got to say about that. Not going to try and get emotional there. We're just going to say that that was a very nice thing, and with that, we've covered all the news that we've gotten inside of the Northern Front today. Wonderful news. This is the best news we've ever gotten in the entire war. This is really something. And so, with that being said, before we move on to the Eastern Front and start covering the news there, we're going to take some questions from the chat, around 3 to 5 of them. And so what do we got, Matthew?
So good afternoon, chat. It's good to be with you again. For everybody in the chat saying that they're having issues with the live stream, I'm not sure if it's a network issue on our end or if it's an issue with YouTube. It's kind of having symptoms of maybe a DDoS attack on our network. I'm not really sure which one it is. I'm kind of speculating. But hopefully the issues get resolved. We are taking measures to try to preserve the stream, so don't worry about that. We are working on it. But our first question up tonight is from Zeta Lane, who puts in a donation of $50 and says, Slava Kyiv and Slava Ukraine.
Slava Kyiv and Slava Ukraina. I'm so happy that we've gotten this news today. This is huge news, and this is something that I don't think anyone saw coming. I didn't even see it coming. I thought it'd be quite some while until the Ukrainians were able to push them all the way back to the border. But we got the news today that they had completely wiped them out and pushed them back into pretty much onto the Belarusian side of the border. This means the 40-mile-long convoy ended up being nothing. This also means that the Russians didn't have any grand plan. They didn't fix the logistical issues. Nothing changed in that front. Everyone had been talking about, and you know, I mean, like some people in the chat, of course, most of the times they're Russian bots, but some people want to say, oh, the Russians have a plan. Just wait. You know, they're going to put it all together and they're just going to push in Kyiv and the war's over. Well, look who's laughing now, because this war is turning in the Ukrainians' favor so fast, it's even shocking me, and I'm very pro-Ukrainian in what I think they're going to be able to do. So, thank you very much for the support. Once again, Z-Lane, it means a lot to me. It helps me to run this channel, and I'm so glad to hear this great news that we've gotten today. And so, with that, we're moving on to the next question.
And real quickly, I just want to recognize a couple of donations left without comments. We have an $18 donation from David Williams. We have a $20 donation from Freedom First. And then we have a $50 donation from Aurora Enak, who says, "Glory to Ukraine."
And I thank you all very much. The support does help these streams keep going, and I'm so glad that these streams have gone on long enough for me to share this huge news with you all today and see this historical moment. This is times like these are the kind of moments where I sit here and think, I cannot wait for the day that a peace agreement is signed, and we... Of course, you know, then that'll be the end of the daily streams, because my promise is that I was going to cover every single day of the war until the war's over. That kind of changed a little bit because Mondays are now an off day for me, so that way I can make sure to keep on doing this thing. But it's so incredible to me that, you know, this happened today, and that there is going to be a day sometime in the future, don't know when, it's probably going to be within the next few weeks, that a peace agreement is signed by the Russians and the Ukrainians, and this war will be over. And I will be here to talk about it. I was here in the first hours of the war up till today, and I hope to be around, and the stream will still be running at the time that the Ukrainians sign the peace treaty and maintain their sovereignty, and just do something like declare neutrality. But the end goal is that they will maintain their sovereignty. I can't wait to see that one day. And so I thank you all so much for the support, and I'm glad that some of y'all have returned to support the channel again. It helps us out and continues to help us bring this news to y'all. And so, with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Muskrat82, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, "What is your take on Ukraine keeping the north secured and rotating to the east and south to defend and take that area back? Do you think they will take a few from BTGs from north and move them down?"
I believe, I don't really want to get into the exacts about the Ukrainian military, because sometimes I'm right to a pinpoint, and, you know, if I am right to a pinpoint, we've seen that apparently this stream is getting some level of interest from the Russians. I mean, like, they released a map that was almost a carbon copy of mine, the Ministry of Defense did, some while ago, which was just shocking to everyone here on the channel. I didn't even believe that either until I saw it. But I believe that the Ukrainians will be able to hold the north very well. I think that the Russians have completely given up, because their window of opportunity to seize Kyiv has passed. There's no, you know, pushing back into northern Ukraine and trying to reach Kyiv again would be pointless at this time. So I don't think that'll ever happen. So I think that they can stay pretty secure up here in the northern area. And so I think that a lot of Ukrainian units have now been freed up from the defense of the capital, and will start moving eastwards and towards the southern front, and start adding a lot of pressure down there on the Russians, who are already suffering on the eastern front. And they're meeting kind of like a stalemate right now here in the south. We still haven't heard any news about Kherson, so that's why I'm kind of saying that things have kind of grinded for a halt for the Ukrainians down there, because they haven't managed to do a blitzkrieg like they've done in other parts of the country and retake the city of Kherson yet. But we'll have to wait for the coming days and see if that is the case. But that's kind of my stance right now, so I hope I answered that question. I thank you very much for the support. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to one more question, and then we're going to start covering the Eastern Front news.
All right, and our next question up is from a longtime channel supporter, Anthony K. Smith, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, "Helicopter strike on Belgorod and Russia get serious with peace talks. I say advance on Belgorod and advance on Crimea and see how more serious they can get."
Very interesting input on that. I think that the Belgorod attack actually did start to make the Russians take the peace talks a little bit more seriously. And just as an example, a historical context to a country kind of attacking another one in hopes of ending a war sooner. During the Israeli War of Independence in 1949, the Israelis managed to get their hands on a couple of B-17 bombers that had been bought in a surplus yard somewhere in the United States. They managed to bring them to Israel, And then they flew the B-17s from Israel to Cairo, and they bombed the Cairo International Airport by calling in and faking to be a commercial airliner, so the airport turned on its runway lights, and then they just obliterated the airport, which that one move right there actually led to the Israeli War of Independence ending with an overwhelming Israeli victory, and they managed to maintain their sovereignty and such things like that. And so maybe the Belgorod raid really weighed in heavily overnight on the Russian stance in the negotiations, and maybe the Russian government said, "Hey, y'all, this is something that we can't even control anymore." They literally flew helicopters into the city of Belgorod, attacked an oil refinery, and flew back. And so this is something we can't hide from the public. The word of this will spread. There's no way we can stop that. So we need to start trying to end this thing before stuff gets worse. That may have been what happened there. So I believe that may have actually led to the Russians having a more apt, negotiation stance today when they went into it, and they were like, yeah, we might be able to actually reach an agreement here. That may have led them to do that. Moving on to the last part of that question. Hopefully I'm answering this part correctly. I'll actually read back the last part of that question, Matthew, so that way I can make sure to get that right.
So let's see. It was the one about the helicopter strike on Belgorod and Russia. And they say advance on Belgorod and advance on Crimea. And he says to see how much more serious they can get.
I wouldn't advance on Belgorod because I feel, there's kind of two different situations. I kind of been viewing them equally, but if for some reason the Russians were to view them differently, Crimea would be a much safer option for Ukraine to commit to rather than Belgorod, because Belgorod would be attacking like permanent Russian land that's always been Russian since the dawn of civilization in this part of the world. And so that would be kind of scary, because that would be threatening Russia's sovereignty directly. You would be launching an invasion into their territory. That may make the Russians freak out and start doing desperate acts, because if they couldn't hold back the invasion then, they would never be able to hold it back. And so they may start using nukes and stuff, and then that would evolve into a worldwide conflict, and that would be terrible. Meanwhile, while I do view the Russian stance on Crimea as that it's sovereign Russian territory and they'll defend it, much like they would anything inside of mainland Russia in a way, kind of like Belgorod, maybe they would view it differently at this point, considering that things are going so poorly for them, and they would try and say, it was Ukrainian anyway, so we can kind of lose that in a way in some kind of peace talks. Who really knows? But that's kind of my opinion on it, and I hope I've kind of like touched on that in a pretty good way. That's really just my opinions and assumptions based off of the information I've gotten, and it is kind of taking a little bit of leeway in some areas, but I hope that answered it pretty well. And so with that, we've actually reached the very end of this first question segment. So hang tight, everyone. We will get to everyone's super chats tonight, but for everyone who's here for the news, I'm going to make sure to get to the rest of the news for y'all. And so we're going to move on to the Eastern Front and the location unknowns. We've actually had the same amount of location unknowns that we've had for the past 2 days, pretty much. And so we're going to start with our usual location unknowns of Russian vehicles getting destroyed. Well, actually, we're starting off with Ukrainian vehicles that got destroyed today. This is footage. I'm not exactly sure from what kind of vehicle, but it's footage through a camera that claims that this is a Russian attack on 2 Ukrainian tanks, and it appears that they wiped them out. As you can see, the first tank was hit, and it appears that it was destroyed, which is somewhat unfortunate, or rather unfortunate, actually. And it appears that the second tank was also hit directly, and we're not sure as to the fate of that one, but we can assume that it was most likely knocked out or the crew bailed. While this is sad news to see, of course, it's always terrible to see Ukrainian units get destroyed, I always have to remind y'all today that while Ukrainian soldiers do die at times, we do have to remember that they are dying to liberate their entire country at this point. We've seen that their efforts and their deaths have not been in vain in the Northern Front, as the Russians have completely retreated or collapsed today. We're not really sure as of which, but in the Northern Front, that was the case. And so we know if they hold on longer and fight as hard as they can, like they have been for the past 38 days, there is actual progress that can be made in pushing the Russians back. And so all I gotta say about that video right there is that those Ukrainians, if they did die, their deaths are not in vain, because the Ukrainians are making progress and they've turned the tide of this war. And so I hope that in the future, they won't be looked at as people who died without a cause. They'll be looked at as people who died defending their country and making sure that it would stay free into the foreseeable future. So we're now going to move on to the next video where we're going to see some Stugna ATGMs, of course, sing at work. So I have to mute this video, unfortunately, because it's got some copyrighted music in it. But nonetheless, Stugna's taking out Russian vehicles again in large numbers today. As we see, another ATGM lets fly towards a Russian target. Bam, hits it dead on. Tank is knocked out. We can see it again even. And this is all from today. This isn't a compilation of like weeks of Stugna footage. This is all from today. So that's good news to see. They are doing unparalleled amounts of damage to the Russian army. I mean, this is something you would think the U.S. military would do to the Russians if we got in a global war. And the Ukrainians are managing to do it on a shoestring budget with 40 million people inside of their country and probably around 200-something thousand of those actually being mobilized into military service. And we also know that around 4 million Ukrainian citizens have fled the country, and around 2 million of those are children, which I feel very sorry for them, but we may touch on that later on in the stream when we get to the international news. Anyways, moving on from that, we can see more footage of Stugna strikes occurring across the country, and more evidence of them being successful. Down there at the very end of the street is a Russian tank. The ATGM, I believe, is on the way at the moment. Not entirely sure. Haven't really heard the sound of the launch yet. Oh, apparently it did. And the tank was wiped out. It's good stuff. I mean, I've got to tell you, it's not the fact that Russians are getting killed in these tanks that's the good thing. Let's get that clear. The good thing is knowing is that the Russian advances are being halted, and the Ukrainian offensives, if this is in the process of an offensive, are doing so well, you might as well equate it to the Russian blitzkrieg that they did at the first few days of the war. It's just good stuff to see. So we're now going to move on to the next video, Location Unknown News, where we're going to see more Russian tanks being destroyed. The sources of videos today that have come out of Russian tanks being destroyed is endless. And here's just some of it. Here's another footage of another Stugna taking out another Russian tank. This one appears to actually be driving away from the Stugna launcher, from what we can kind of tell. So we can see another Stugna missile get launched. And boom, hits the tank, knocks it out. That looked like a hit to the direct back of the turret, which is the weakest part of the turret, of course, which probably wiped out the tank along with the crew, unfortunately. But that's still great news to know that the Ukrainians are doing unparalleled and untold amounts of damage on the Russian forces every single day, and it appears that it's more ramped up now than it's ever been, considering that they're in offensives in most parts of the country. We're now going to move on to a video where we can see 2 birds taken out with 1 stone as a Ukrainian artillery shell knocked out 2 Russian vehicles with 1 shot. Here's the footage right here. I believe that is the artillery shell that took out both vehicles. Not exactly sure yet. Yes, it was right down there, apparently. So it took out a Russian tank and a BMP with 1 shot. And, according, of course, to the captions, it didn't even damage the church which was nearby, which is a good thing. They're not damaging any of their historical structures. Most of the churches and, well, really just churches inside of Ukraine are old as Methuselah. They're hundreds of years old in most cases. Here in the United States, I know a lot of international viewers are used to historical buildings in their country being hundreds, if not 1,000 years old or older. But here in the United States, a building being hundreds of years old is unfathomable because most buildings here in the U.S. are only about 50 to 100 years old at most. So with that, that's the end of that video. We're now going to move on to the next Location Unknown video where we can see a Ukrainian column get hit. Of course, I don't try and skew any of the footage we get, so if I see any Ukrainian units being destroyed, I also put those up as well. But we know that they're being destroyed at a much lower rate than the Russian vehicles are. And so, of course, in a war, it is inevitable that both sides will take casualties. But the great thing to know is that the Ukrainians are taking very few of them compared to their Russian counterparts, which might as well be pushing themselves into some kind of meat grinder at this point. So here's the video. This crewman's belling out of the truck. Their convoy is under attack at the moment. So now he's getting out of the vehicle. And you'll see when he flips up the camera in a minute that a decent amount of this convoy has actually been destroyed. Not exactly sure from what. As you can see up there, multiple vehicles are on fire. I don't know what exactly has caused this damage to the convoy. I'm assuming that, of course, it isn't a ground force because we don't hear any incoming ground fire towards the convoy. And considering that they're in the same location of the wreckage of the rest of it, you would assume that they would be under fire if it was ground force. So I'm assuming that this was some kind of drone attack by the Russians on this convoy. But then again, that's entirely assumptions based off of what we can see and what we might be able to tell from this. And so with that, that's the end of that Location Unknown news. And we're now going to move on to some lighter stuff, of course, because always seeing Ukrainian units and vehicles being destroyed is always unfortunate news. So here I'm going to show y'all something to lighten that up a little bit, which is another Russian vehicle being wiped out by an ATGM today. And there goes the ATGM. They let it fly. It's heading towards its target. Boom, hits it. I'm not exactly sure what kind of vehicle that was. It may have been just a munitions truck or something like that, but it went up like a bomb. You know, tanks don't go up like that. Usually most vehicles don't go up like that, so I have no clue what that was. But whatever it was carrying a large deal of explosives or munitions. That's all we can really tell from this video. And so that's the end of that video. Wonderful stuff to see. We're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we saw Russian soldiers. Of course, we know that they steal. They're almost thieves in a way. We saw them stealing toy cars the other day as the Ukrainians were rummaging through abandoned BTR. Now it looks like they're trying to steal panties as well. I mean, like, they're now stooping to levels of perversion. So here's this video. I mean, like, they're strolling all over. It's insane. I've never seen anything like this. Look at this. And it's nothing but women's clothes. I mean, like, this is just sick. I mean, like, not only are they killing civilians, but they're stooping down to levels of sickish perversion, and they're getting away with it because they're the army, and who's going to stand up to the army as a civilian? You know, I don't know exactly what the Geneva Conventions. Well, I believe that the Geneva Conventions deals with combatants. I don't really know what the rules of war encompasses as far as things like this, but I feel like this is stooping into some kind of violation of the rules of war in some regard. But, you know, nonetheless, I don't know the exact details as to what it would be violating. If someone could actually give me some information in the chat as to what this may be violating, because I feel like it would be doing something in that regard, please let me know. But anyways, here's the rest of the video. Just sick stuff. The Russians are not only thieves, they're also perverts, it seems. So we're now going to move on to the next video, where actually some pictures, where we can see the Ukrainians have now captured another Ka-52, and this one appears to be in working condition, maybe good condition. Not exactly working condition, or otherwise it wouldn't have been ditched in a field, but it looks like it's in fairly decent shape, except for some damage here and there. I don't really know if this is something that the Ukrainians would have the supplies or the logistics to maintain, but maybe, just maybe, there would be the possibility of kind of repairing this helicopter to bring it into operation for the Ukrainians. Not entirely sure if that would be a possibility for them, considering that the the supply chain for this helicopter is probably entirely Russian. So I'm not really sure about that. That's entirely assumptions, but one can only dream and one can only hope. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see evidence that Russian soldiers, I'm not exactly sure where this happened. I was kind of assuming it may have been in the Kyiv front, where we've seen it pretty much collapse today. But this may have been evidence of those soldiers, in particular, stripping their uniforms, putting on civilian clothes, and running for the hills. So here's the video.
Армія освободителей тянула трофеї, блядь. Але, блядь, після піздюльки, блядь, покидали всю форму.
Зато, блядь, планшет надо ему, блядь.
Well, their uniforms are completely stripped off in this field. Every single bit of it. And it also looks like they had some liquor as well. I think that may be... I'm not going to make any assumptions. I'm sure there's a lot of y'all out there who drink a decent bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with enjoying a drink. But I'm sure that y'all know exactly what that is. I'm not really a big drinker of alcohol at all, so I don't really know anything about it. But we see 2 bottles of liquor there. We're now going to let the video continue.
То віддаси хлопцям на нужди завода.
Ну це воді, блядь. Ну хоч одне радує, блядь.
Армія освободителей, бля, покидала речі, бля.
And more you look at how many there are. It's like a whole entire Russian company just sat there and stripped off everything in their uniforms. Now this tells you that there needs to be the martial law will have to be continued in Ukraine for some time after this war to try and find out if there's any strange people in places that people don't really remember them being, and saying, hey, that guy is kind of odd. You know, he's kind of has a Russian dialect, and also we've never seen him in this town before, and have him arrested because people, well, you know, people who look like they're civilians could just be Russians in civilian clothing that are trying to get away with making sure that they're not prosecuted for war crimes or anything like that. So this will kind of have to be something like the Allies did at the end of World War II, where you kind of have a German manhunt in a way, looking for war criminals and such, and former soldiers, and sending them back to where they came, which is Russia in this case. But anyways, I'm going to let the video continue and let y'all see the amount of uniforms that have been spread out over this place.
Завойовану, блядь, освобожденную, блядь, у місцевого населення. І повтікала. І повтікала. Армія освободителей.
I mean, like, you know, I would say something along the lines of maybe this Russian unit, since it's close to kind of like a lake, maybe they stripped all this stuff off to bathe or something, but there's no way. I mean, like, everything is gone. I mean, like, they took off everything and they just threw it everywhere. I mean, like, of course you'd do that if you're like going into the river to skinny dip or something, but I mean, like, wouldn't, you know, I mean, like, they're not even around. That tells you that they didn't go skinny dipping. They ran off and they switched out their uniforms. I was thinking about that for a second. I was like, well, what if they were just taking a bathe? But then they would have been captured, and we would have had video of them being captured, but we don't have that. We just have the clothes. So there's probably 100 Russian soldiers that have stripped everything off their uniforms and went running into the woods in civilian clothes, and the Ukrainians have no clue who they are, what they look like, or where they went. And that's something a little bit concerning. But anyways, I'm going to let the video keep running.
Ну що я можу сказати, армія освободителів? Від себе особисто дякуємо за те, що Збройні Сили України добавилась новітня їхня зброя. Ти що собі скажеш?
Дякую за, блядь, за збройні.
Значить, розвідувальний взвод треба переформатовувати в розвідувальну роту нашого батальйона. Амуніції, зброї нам вистачає. Слава Україні!
So that's the end of the video, showing all the uniforms that have been abandoned near this kind of like creek, it appears. I'm sure that's a river in Ukraine, but here in America that would be classified as a creek. But interesting nonetheless. One can only imagine what may have happened here, or where these Russian soldiers have gone, because there's no evidence that these soldiers were captured. So we know that they weren't captured bathing. On top of that, they wouldn't have told the entire company to go bathing at the same time to literally be caught with their pants down. That's not something that would have happened either. So I'm saying, here's the thing I'm thinking. The only logical assumption that we can get from this video is that they actually did, like the title says, change their clothes and ran off into the forest in civilian clothing. That's the only thing I can assume from this. So now we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see Ukrainian soldiers visit a zoo, and they see a sweet little animal here from North America, the raccoon, the American raccoon. And, you know, when I saw this video, I was like, you know, how in the world is this thing a zoo animal? It's just a raccoon. And then I remembered this was Ukraine, and they don't have American raccoons.
Воєнкому скажу. А, не дривається? Патрони. Ага, от,
Бачите, бойовий єнот, блін.
а я думаю, откуда в тебе патрони?
Ти бойовий єнот, ти бачиш, диви.
Isn't it?
Вон підсумок на
There's something very cute about raccoons, you know. It's kind of a mixed bag with them, though. You know, you might run into a somewhat docile raccoon, or this raccoon might be hostile. You know, I've had interactions with both of them because here in the South, these things are pretty common. You know, of course, it's not like a daily thing. It's like every few months or so you may run into one. And since I've moved, I haven't run into a single one. But they're very sweet, cute-looking little animals, and it's really neat that the Ukrainians actually have one in a zoo. That's really interesting to me.
Ти шпіон.
So it looks like the little raccoon is checking out the Ukrainians' pockets. Now he's trying to climb up. The Ukrainian soldier is now showing the raccoon a hand grenade and teaching it the ways of war. Of course, you know, it looks like the fuse has been pulled out of this one, so it's not like this raccoon could do anything like pull the pin, which I'm sure it could. But still, it's pretty funny nonetheless that he's showing him a grenade.
Куди потягнув? Це моя. Бойовий єнот.
Український бойовий єнот. Розмінірував гранату.
I think the Ukrainians got a new recruit here.
Можна я заберу? Скажи мені відео. Куди? Я не дам. Це моя. За 2 дні до Києва дойти. Це моя. Куди ти пальці судиш?
It really likes the grenade for some reason. It's probably just interested with it because it's an object that's new. But still, very neat nonetheless, and it's very cool to see that the Ukrainian soldiers are having a little bit of fun. I'm sure that this is behind the lines. Obviously, they're not doing this in combat, but they're just enjoying kind of hanging out at one of the zoos that are nearby and playing around with some of the animals like these little North American raccoons here. I'm not really sure if Europe has raccoons. I bet they do, because they also have badgers, but their badgers are totally different than ours. But very neat nonetheless that they're playing around with a North American raccoon. So we're now going to move on to the last 2 bits of location unknown news, where we can see the report of Russian losses. Now, everyone, hold your breaths. What do y'all think it is? Lay out your bets in the chat. Do you think it's 15,000, 16,000, 17,000? How many tanks do you think were destroyed? How many APCs? You know, get ready to have your minds blown away, because this is the official report from the Ukrainian government as to the casualty numbers right now. And as we know, the Russians have confirmed that 10,000 soldiers have been killed in this war, not wounded, and killed. And the United States actually backed up the number of 15,000 about a few days ago. And so here's the numbers that the Ukrainians came out with today. 17,800 personnel, 631 tanks, 1,776 armored personnel carriers. Very nice. That's the year of independence here in the United States. 317 artillery pieces, 100 MLRSs, 54 air defense systems, 143 planes, 4 Iskander missile launchers, 134 helicopters, 1,236 trucks, most likely trucks and cars. That may be a cumulative number of both. 7 ships/motorboats, 76 tankers. We know that that number went up a lot after Bryansk. 87 drones, and 24 items of special equipment. The numbers are piling up for the Russians. The British, as we knew from something that we showed a week ago, weren't even losing this many soldiers per day on average in World War II. And the Russians are losing almost twice that number a day. It was something like the British lost around 170 a day. Right now, the Russians are losing around 360 per day. It's a massive amount of losses. A country cannot keep up this kind of loss on their forces for long, and I'm sure that that's also weighing into the peace agreements that are being talked over right now. So we're now going to move on to the last bit of location unknown news, where we can see a captured MTLB. This is nothing more than a simple armored personnel carrier that the Russians use. I would say that it's somewhat similar in equivalence to an M113 when the U.S. used to operate those, but we retired those quite some while ago, probably, well, a little bit before the invasion of Iraq, and they were hardly being used in the Gulf War. So here's the MTLB.
Срані москалі так тікали, що лишили свою техніку цілу. То не одна. Вона. Там вдалині ще стоїть, просто не видно звідси. Як завжди срач після них.
You know, I just don't get the point. Oh, the video ended. Wow. No, it didn't. I just don't get the point of militaries using armored personnel carriers anymore. And before everyone blasts me, just hear me out. There's a difference in between an armored personnel carrier and an infantry fighting vehicle. A Bradley is an infantry fighting vehicle, and that's all that's really left in the U.S. Armed Forces these days as far as troop transport that's mechanized. It's either some kind of normal truck or it's a Bradley. In the Russian army, they have kind of like, like infantry fighting vehicles in a way. A BMP-2 and a BMP-3 really fall under that category. And then they still have armored personnel carriers that the M113 kind of filled the role of in the U.S. military, and they still use these MTLBs. And what is the point? They really serve no purpose anymore on the modern battlefield. It's kind of dated tech, and that's why the United States started to retire their M113s from frontline service, yet the Russians still live in the 20th century, and they're still using just armored personnel carriers. I mean, like, they don't really have any punch to them, and it's really a waste, honestly, strategically. You don't have to be a genius to see that either, because that's what all modern armies have been turning towards. They've been dropping these lightly armored personnel carriers, and they've been moving more towards the direction of infantry fighting vehicles. Just look at Germany. Look at let me see, Britain with a Warrior. Look at the United States with a Bradley. You know, the Russians have tried to get into that endeavor with the BMP-2s and 3s, but they don't have enough of them, so they're still using these little MTLBs all over the place, and it's just a waste of time, really, you know, a waste of resources. But anyways, you know, they're incredibly poor, the Russians are. They have no budget, so I'm sure that they just have to make do with what they got, and then that kind of discredits their, you know, this is what going way down the rabbit hole, but this kind of discredits the sort of explanation that they're some kind of superpower, because they're so underfunded that they're still using APCs, you know, that are way outdated at this point in terms of modern doctrine. You can't really call them a superpower. They don't even have the budget to update these things. Anyways, I'm going to stop that chit chat here. We're going to move on and just get through the rest of the video. And so that's that. Also, by the way, y'all probably see this YouTube thing at the end, y'all are like trying to take a look at it. I watch a lot of Seinfeld stuff. Seinfeld's pretty funny. So when you see that, yeah, I watch that. Anyways, we're moving on from the location unknowns, and we're now going to move to the Sumy area, where once again, we have the incredibly good news. The Russians have not posted anything from the Sumy/Trostianets area. This lets us know for sure, 100%, that the Russians are losing in this area, or they're not gaining any progress. Because if they were, they would be uploading videos and we would find them. We're not finding them, and that tells us that either the Ukrainians are holding them or they're pushing them back, because the Ukrainians don't really post a lot whenever they're pushing the Russians back in an area. Usually they put that out 2 or 3 days after the fact. So we don't really know what's going on here right now, but we can get the general idea that it's good news for the Ukrainians. Either they're holding the Russians or they're pushing them back. Either one's good. So we're now going to move on down to the area of Kharkiv, and we're also going to include the news in Kremenchuk today and the Eastern Front news all together. Here in Kharkiv, there was footage that came out today from the Russian Ministry of Defense showing that they've hit the Defense Ministry headquarters building in Kharkiv. I'm going to show y'all this video. Of course, this doesn't change the fact that they're losing the war. I guess this is some kind of symbolic thing to them, but it doesn't change what's going on, really. But anyways, there's the footage. The missile hit the building. And I guess in the background, because there was a longer version of this, but I don't really care about the Russian side of things because they're usually just pumping out raw propaganda. The Russians have this press secretary guy. I guess he's kind of like our Pentagon press secretary person here in the United States. And he comes out every day and he just, you know, says stuff. He's kind of like Baghdad Bob in a way. I'm kind of like Baghdad. Anyways, you know, he's kind of like Baghdad Bob in a ways, because he just sits there and spews out garbage. But anyways, they tried to hype this up into a big deal today because they probably have nothing else good to talk about going on around the rest of the country except for what's happening in Mariupol. And now that's starting to look a little shaky as well. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news. Yesterday, I showed you all a video of some kind of animal in a zoo. I actually found out that those things are called tapirs. Apparently, they're from Africa. I didn't know anything about those animals, but I found out today that while we saw them in the zoo yesterday, they've actually loaded them into vehicles and they're now moving them away from the ecological park outside of Kharkiv. So I'm going to let y'all see the video of these tapirs in the back of a van. And they're kind of cute.
Сьогодні нам вдалося евакуювати родину тапірів із екопарка Фельдмана. До речі, це єдина родина в країні, яка дала потомство.
Look at those little things. They're so weird, but they're kind of cute in a way, you know? Anyways, I'm glad to know that they're getting the zoo animals to safety. Some of them are very rare, you know. China actually has a really big deal whenever they give a country pandas. It's actually kind of like a lease system of sorts from what I understand, and the Chinese are very protective about the panda because they consider it a national symbol of their country. And so you know that a decent amount of these animals, well, at least a few of them, not all of them, because raccoons are a dime a dozen kind of thing here in the United States, so I know that that isn't an animal held in high regard by the U.S., but some of these animals that are rarer and are being transported around the world probably have a lot of prestige to them being there, and so protecting these zoo animals are kind of like protecting gifts from countries that were trying to show a sign of goodwill by giving these animals to Ukraine. So I'm very glad to know that they are being taken care of and are safe for the most part, and that they're being transported out of areas that are somewhat dangerous. So we're now going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten in the Eastern Front today from Kremenchuk, where we've seen an airstrike on an oil refinery that the Russians have committed last night. So here's the footage of that. As you can see, the explosions are resounding around the oil silos. Well, actually, it's a refinery. I'm sorry, correction. I'm so used to hearing about silo attacks. It's like brainwashed into me that it's got to be a silo attack. But they're hitting this refinery. I'm guessing that they're trying to further hinder the Ukrainian oil supplies, but I don't really think that's going to do much in terms to help the Russians, because the Russians are just in such a bad position right now, and I don't think there's any way for them to recover it across all of the country. That, I mean, like, they pretty much just lost. I'm hoping that the peace agreements meet a lot of success soon. I actually saw someone say in the comments, and we're going to check on this in a bit, but I saw in the comments somewhere that the peace agreements apparently are moving in the direction of a ceasefire. And if that is the case, that is huge news. But we're going to check on that later on in the night during the questions probably. I'm just going to pull it up and see if anyone's gotten any news on the talks around the world. So anyways, that is the conclusion of the news on the Eastern Front here. And so with that, we're now going to move on to 3 to 5 questions from the chat, and then we're going to continue our news to the Southern Front and the news that we found internationally. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so first up, we have a couple of donations here. We have a $28 donation from Johnny Wishbone and a $27 donation from Johnny Wishbone as well. Thank you very much for your back-to-back donations. We appreciate it very much. Next up, we have a question from M90 Regal Grand Sport for a donation of $20, who says, I just wanted to let everyone know that Moscow Mike passed away today. He was a true beta, snowflake.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the support and giving us a little bit of an update on Moscow Mike. So thank you once again. With that, we're moving on to the next question.
And the next one is from Nunzio, who puts in a donation of $20 and says, Enforcer, I love your stuff. Never get to watch live, but today I get to for a bit. Also check your junk mail. I sent you some info from an email address that starts with trad.
Gotcha. I'll try and look into that after the stream or tomorrow. It's very busy most of the time, and you know, so it's very hard to get around to things like that, but I will look at it. And I thank you very much for enjoying the streams, and I hate that you haven't been able to watch them live until tonight, but hey, tonight you got on during the best stream that we've ever had in terms of the news we're actually delivering. The news today, I gotta say again, y'all, is massive. I mean, I'm really hyped tonight, actually. This news is huge, that they've wiped out the Russians north of Kyiv. They've either withdrawn completely or they got wiped out. It was one or the other. We're still getting the information on that right now. But wow, y'all, this was amazing. I love that we got this news today. And so thank you so much for the support. I'm glad that you got on live tonight to see the huge news we got today. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from MMC, who puts in a donation of $20 and says, do you think Z's changed into panties? Grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions of 1949. The following acts are representative of violations of the law of war. Use of civilian clothes.
Interesting. That is what I was wondering if they were violating or not. And I did see some people in the comments saying, what if that was blown out from a store window? Here's the thing, y'all. If you look at the video again, and you can rewind to watch it, because I'm going to try and keep this thing moving forward instead of backwards, you can see that it was a residential area, y'all. It was a neighborhood. So everyone who was asking, well, what about, like, the clothes? Like, maybe they were just blown out of a store? No, it was the neighborhood. They were probably going through people's houses and just grabbing stuff and just dropped it and thought, whatever, you know, we've gotten plenty of it anyway, so might as well just move on or something. So that's kind of my answer to that. But I thank you very much for the support once again, and I'm glad that you shared that information with us so that way we could know exactly what kind of rules of war it was breaking. So thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the news in the Southern Front.
And the last question of the segment goes to RDY4THDL, who puts in a donation of $18 and says, I'm watching 10 minutes behind, but wanted to ask if RT in Russia or Russian DOD reported the strike on Belgrade.
Belgrade?
I guess Belgorod.
I don't know if they did. I don't really check Russian news a lot because most of it's propaganda. And after a couple of bad stints with Russian news on this channel where I watch it, and I'm like, I shouldn't even really included this because it's just garbage on their part. I've decided not to really even look into that to include news reports and stuff because most of it's just untrue or made up. So I don't know if they did report it, but if they did, we'll try and get some information on that. And so I hope I answered that question a little bit, and I thank you once again so much for the support. It helps this channel run every single day. And so with that, we've answered all the questions of this segment, and now we're going to move on to the news from the Southern Front. The Donetsk and Luhansk areas, we're just going to call that the Donbass, have had a relative quiet stint today, as we've only gotten one bit of news where we've seen a village get shelled on video. This village, I believe, is called Mariupol. There it is in the title. And you can see that artillery is raining down on it. It looks like somewhat smaller artillery, maybe like some kind of mortars, but still nonetheless. Oh, sorry. Hang on. Let me get off of that. That's a Seinfeld thing. Clicked on that wrong. But anyways, what I was saying about that is that the artillery was raining down on the city, and the thing is that this has been a heavy battleground, the village of Mariupol, in between the Ukrainians and the DPR since the beginning of the war. We've been getting a few pictures here and there coming out of that. Yesterday, we saw DPR forces complaining that the Russians have also withdrawn from that area of the front and are no longer fighting at Mariupol with them, which is interesting news. And I'm thinking, considering that we've gotten a small snippet of information there about the Russians also withdrawing from the Eastern Front, what if these peace talks in the background are actually going to conclude in a few days with some kind of ceasefire and the Russian units are just going to withdraw? If that is the case, that would make sense. Maybe they just withdrew from that area for some kind of repositioning. We're not entirely sure. All of this is assumptions at the moment. I'm just trying to run through the things that would make some kind of logical sense. But I'm not sure. You know, it could go really either way at this point. So we're now going to move on from the Donetsk area and the Donbass in general, and we're now going to move on into Mariupol, where today we've had an incredibly quiet day in terms of news that comes out of Mariupol, as we've only gotten 2 bits of news. Usually we get around 5 to 7, but it seems like the news keeps on getting quieter and quieter from Mariupol, and I'm not really sure what that is suggestive of, but we'll just have to wait in the coming days and see if it is leading us to say or assume anything. So moving on from that, the first bit of news we can see is Chechens delivering quote-unquote humanitarian aid. But I was reading the caption of this, and I haven't had time to fact-check this entirely, but I'm assuming that this caption is not wrong because I didn't see anyone refuting this in the comments of this post. But it says that this is actually stolen goods from the northern side of the country because these brands are local brands up in the northern side of Ukraine. And so it appears that the Russians stole the supplies from northern Ukraine and then shipped them to southern Ukraine to the Chechens in Mariupol so that way they could drop it off for a propaganda shoot and really no lose skin in the matter. Lose no skin in this matter. So I'm going to let y'all see the video. Oh yeah, it's got copyright music, so I can't play anything. But as you can see, they're unloading the supplies, trying to look like good Samaritans. We know, of course, that they're killing civilians left and right, so this really doesn't mean anything to us, but I'm sure that the Russians love this and eat it up. You know, because, you know, of course I'm not saying all of them, I'm saying the Patriots. But yeah, anyways, this guy's giving a little speech. And, you know, of course I can't play it because there's copyright music playing. That's a nice dog. And once again, you have to remember that apparently all of these supplies, as far as we know, were actually stolen from northern Ukraine and then shipped down here, I guess for the Russians to use and maybe pass out as humanitarian aid or something. But still, you know, you always have to take these kinds of Russian videos with a grain of salt because they're just so faked that it's, you know, everything they do is so faked. And you could go and watch all the old streams and see all the critiques I have of their combat footage that kind of make it look fake. But then again, you know, with that being said, you have to take everything they do with a grain of salt because you don't really know if it's true or not. And so with that, here's the end of the video. And that's the end of it. And another interesting thing, one more thing. It's really weird to me, you know, how they're passing out so much humanitarian aid. I mean, there's literally a pile of it on the side of the road. And they only draw around like 3 or 4 citizens in this video. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, it's about 5. That's it. Now, all those supplies and 5 people. And that kind of tells you that it's made up in a way as well, because if it was a large amount of humanitarian aid, I'm sure a lot of civilians would be lining up for that stuff, because we see in Kharkiv, whenever people are going to the supermarket and then the Russians try and obliterate the poor civilians just trying to get some food, they are lined up in the hundreds. And then we only see 5 people here at this giant pile of supplies. And you know that wouldn't be the case, because these people are starving in Mariupol right now and they have no water. So that, you know, then again kind of leads me to believe that this stuff is kind of made up and it's a propaganda coup, the whole entire thing, from where they got the supplies to the people in the video and everything. So we're now going to move on to the last bit of news inside of Mariupol, where we can see that some people have apparently decided to start using donkeys to pull a cart through the city, and I'm assuming that this is probably because the gas reserves inside the city have run out for civilian vehicles and military vehicles alike. And so here's the video. On the bright side, at least they're still able to transport some stuff around the city. And we also see some vehicles moving here, but they have Z's on them, so I'm guessing that the Russians may be supplying these vehicles with gas, but I'm guessing that the civilians are left with nothing, because we can see here that they're using a cart led by donkeys. And it looks like all the vehicles that are running with gas appear to have some kind of Z on them, perhaps. This one is a civilian car, most likely, because it says children on the back. And we don't see, well, maybe that piece of paper there, that slip, has a Z on it. Can't really tell exactly. Now, you can kind of make out what may be a Z, but I don't want to be trying to, like, see something that may not be there. That may be a civilian car that's got gas, which may suggest that there is a little bit of gas left in the city. But look at all these people out who are just walking down the street. I wonder where they're going. I wonder if they're trying to flee the city on foot. I don't really have a lot of information either way, so all that's nothing but pure assumptions. So we're now going to move on from the city of Mariupol. Once again, I have to say that the defenders of Mariupol, particularly the Azov Battalion, because they're the only one there, have been defending the city valiantly for the past few weeks, mostly the entirety of a month, and they appear to not be wavering yet. And so we don't know how long the city will last, but they have certainly served their purpose in the defense of the country, and hopefully will be memorialized and put down in history for the staunch resistance that they put up to the Russians. So we're now going to move on to the rest of the news on the southern front, which we don't have much left. We only have one. And this video today claims that this was a protest that was broken up violently in the city of Inohradar, which is by the Zaporizhzhia power plant. One thing I would like to note before I start this video is that it does kind of look like Kherson in a way. It kind of looks like the same square where they broke up the protest in Kherson. So I'm just going to go into that video with that being said, and I know everyone loves that phrase. But I want everyone to know that because I'm not entirely sure if this video was labeled correctly, but here is the video. Okay, wait a minute, no. This isn't Inohradar. Oh, wait, no, this isn't Kherson. This has to be Inohordar, because I just remembered in the other video of Kherson, there was a green bus that was having to try and move through the crowd, and we don't see that in this video. This is apparently some kind of different square, and so I will assume that this was from Inohordar today. So anyways, here's the rest of the video. And so that's the end of that video. You can see once again the Russians who are claiming they're liberating the Ukrainians from the fascists appear to be fascists themselves and shutting down free speech and assemblies across the country. And so we're now going to move on from that to the international news we've gotten today. And I'm going to show you all an interesting input from a Russian citizen who was asked what do they think about the lack of supplies due to sanctions. And we have a direct English translation here. And so here's the video.
Now that we have the sanctions, it turns out that in Russia there are no aircraft parts and we can't even produce bearings. How did this happen? Well, how it happened, we're simple people. Personally, I'm okay with everything. I don't fly on planes and I don't need bearings. Something like that. I'm okay with everything we have in our country. On the one hand, I'm a patriot. I always support what our president does. I support him completely. So to be a patriot means to agree with everything. Did I get it right? Well, not with everything, not always, and not with everything, but in some way more yes than no. And who is not a patriot? Well, not a patriot is a person who, at the moment, is screaming no war and then is screaming, you see, our government is bad, we don't have sugar, we don't have medicine. It is wrong. So what do we have to do? Well, I don't know, endure or something. I think it's better to endure. I am against of mass events of all kinds. So it's like that. Then how can we make ourselves heard by the government? Well, I can't answer that question. I don't know.
And so I would like to give a shout out to the guy who did the dubbing on this video, Ivan Doan. I'm not sure if that last name was pronounced correctly, but make sure to try and find him on the internet and give him a large amount of praise and support for dubbing and translating these videos that are coming out of the war at the moment, because that's a great service that he's doing for us, so that way we can actually understand what is being said in these videos. We're now going to move on to the other bit of news we've gotten from Moscow today, where we can hear that the CEO of the Sukhoi company has resigned over the war in Russia. Right here is a link to the particular bit of news. I won't click on it because this is just kind of an elaboration on it. But anyways, the CEO of the Sukhoi company today stepped down from his position and resigned, stating that he did not agree with the war and he did not like that Sukhoi aircraft, which are mostly, from what he said, a civilian manufacturer of aircraft. He does not like seeing Su-34s, which the Sukhoi company produces, being used in Ukraine to kill the civilians of Kharkiv specifically, apparently because the CEO of Sukhoi is either from Kharkiv or he worked in Kharkiv at a time, and so he doesn't like the fact that they're being used there, and so he resigned and stepped down from his position today, which is a very large protest on his part and may put him in danger with the Russian government, but it's a good thing to know that people do stand by their morals in Russia, even if it means that they may get reprisals or prosecution or persecution on the part of the government. It's good to know that the CEO of the Sukhoi company is a stand-up guy with good morals and good values who can actually see what's going on. And so we're now going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten today. This one's very interesting because it actually happened in California, of all places, in the United States. But apparently a Russian comedian found offense to not being allowed at some kind of amusement park in California. And so there is actually a speech-to-text translation at the bottom of the screen. So check that out and see what the guy said, because I think this guy lives in La La Land or Wonderland or something with what he said and what he's thinking is the Russians can do. And so here's the video.
Развлечений Санта-Моника. Пацифик парк. Нас не пустили, а негров пустили всех. Добрый вечер.
And you know something else? You know what's interesting to me is that the guy's this is so stupid to me. He was refused entry into the park for some reason. Later on, he said that the guy said they were closing, and then he says they let in the blacks. It's like, what's wrong with the blacks? Like, this guy's apparently a racist or something. But anyways, we're gonna let the video continue.
Там говорит, стоп, вы close. Мне говорит, идет, говорит, проходите. Вот и потом и называется. Толерантные стандарты вот эти все. Ну ничего, ничего, Володя для вас приготовил это. Подарочек. Скоро вот это все.
And then at the end of this, he says, soon all of this will cease to exist. Buddy, I don't think you understand, but the Russians are getting their asses handed to them by Ukraine. And if they can't even stand up to Ukraine, what makes you think that Russia could even make anything cease to exist in the United States in a conventional war? Of course, in a nuclear war, they could probably flatten the place, but, you know, this guy lives in the Wonderland or something, apparently ignorant of the actual political situation around the world. So, guy's a little stupid. They may have, maybe the guy who was in charge of the park didn't let him in because he saw that the guy was stupid or something instead. So anyways, that's the end of that video, and that's the end of the news we've gotten today. I thought that one was just silly, and I had to include it because that guy's living in some kind of delusional land where Russia is an actual powerful country that should be feared. So with that, we've actually concluded all the news for today, and we're now going to start answering everyone's questions from the chat. And so with that being said, Matthew, what do we got?
So currently it looks like we have about 25 to 30 super chats here. So the first one up we have is from DC90, who puts in a donation of $20 and says, hey guys, back again tonight. Fantastic news today. Love to see it, by the way. Have you seen the video of the UAF soldier knocking on a BMP hatch, yelling at the Russians in German? It's quite humorous.
I have seen that. That was actually a good while ago, about a week ago. But yes, I did see it. I actually put it on the stream, and it was hilarious. I thought it was the funniest thing because the guy was pretty much just harassing this Russian crew that was stuck in their tank, and they had no way out. It was almost like a comedy routine in a way. I don't know what the end result of that was, but I did include it. So I thank you very much for the support. I'm glad you're back, by the way. Welcome back to the stream. It's good to know that you're back. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Eric Scholl. Eric, thank you very much for your support. And next up, we have a question from Knuckles for a donation of $20. He says, I watched a news channel for India a couple days ago, and they were showing the Russians with tons of food handing out to hundreds of people in Mariupol. Also just got a tweet saying explosions in Odessa right now. Not sure what that means.
I did hear a little bit about explosions in Odessa, but I wasn't able to get any video footage to confirm that. And the other thing with Mariupol is that we also saw videos of them handing out food in Kherson, and I did not put those on stream because I felt like they were propaganda. And then 2 days later, video came out showing that it was like pretty much a setup by the Russian propaganda ministry where they had set up the food trucks, they had trucked in people dressed in civilian clothes, and it was pretty much being run like a movie set, so that way they could film a propaganda shoot in Russia. So I believe that the Indian news, because the Indians and the Pakistanis are kind of more Russian aligned than Western aligned, and I think that the United States should start revisiting their stance on India here in the future, considering that they're almost friendly with the Russians at this point. And I think that that was just them trying to show some kind of support through Russia, at least through the propaganda side of things, because we do have to remember that their logistics have completely fallen apart, and the Northern Front is a clear example of that today. But I thank you very much for the support, Knuckles. Thank you very much for being a return streamer, a return supporter of the stream, and bringing up these interesting questions. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from BSG Wolf, who puts in a donation of $20 and says, what do you think of Ukraine taking the Donbass permanently now?
I think, if you do you take that as him talking about taking the DPR and LPR as well, Matthew?
Yeah, the entire Donbass region, I believe.
All right. Well, I don't think that'd be really out of the question. I think, if anything, if they were to try and launch offensives into currently held Russian territory that was kind of controlled by the Russians pre-war, I believe that that would actually be the safest bet, is trying to retake the entirety of the Donbass. So I can agree with that. I think that that would be something that the Ukrainians could actually look into doing. I'm not really sure about Crimea, and I know that a direct invasion into like actual Russia would be a terrible idea, but it seems like diplomatically and politically the easiest decision to go towards to reclaim lost Ukrainian land would be to try and invade the DPR and LPR and bring those back under Ukrainian control. So I hope that input helps. That's, once again, my opinion on the matter and based off of my assumptions and knowledge that I've been gathering over the course of this war. So take it with a grain of salt. But I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question in a way. And so we're going to move on to the next one.
And real quickly, I just want to recognize a couple of donations without comments. We have an $18 donation from Boyan Bejnov. Thank you for your support. We have a $12 donation from Freddie R. and an $11 donation from Krister Pedersen. Thank you all for your support of the channel. And the next question up we have is from Mech Tactical, who puts in a $12 donation and says, "Hello, fellow tuber. The other day you asked why a friggin' Mosin Nagant. It's the range advantage over typical AKs. I know it's super old and lame, but it does work."
It does work. Yes, I can agree with that because I actually... Okay, now I'm not one of those weird kind of gun people who are like, no one needs a modern gun, because I actually did own a lot of them at one point. But, you know, because I'm a collector of classical guns, you know, like historic guns in a way, I only have rifles like the 1903 and the Krag Jorgensen. So if you're a really big gun collector, then you'll know that the Krag is kind of a rarer gun, and I love that gun. It's a really cool gun. But anyways, moving on from that. Yes, they are still effective. You could use a 1903 or a Krag in a modern battlefield. It's just that it's not the best... I guess, well, I mean, like, really beyond, like, the weight and the ergonomics of the thing, it's pretty on par with a normal bolt-action rifle that would be issued these days to marksmen and snipers and such, but, you know, it's not modern issue. And so, while it may be effective, it's still somewhat shameful that they're having to draw, you know, the Russians, of all people, who have been trying to espouse and claim for years that they're a superpower militarily, are now issuing out Mosin Nagants. It kind of shows that they're a little backwards. You know, why not issue an SV98? It does the same thing, but it's actually new. And that kind of tells us that they don't have the supplies or the logistics that they claim to have, and the budget as well. So I thank you very much for the support, but that's kind of my input on it and why I was scoffing at a Mosin in a way. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and real quickly, I want to recognize a $20 donation from HT. Thanks, HT. That's very generous of you, and we do appreciate it. The next question we have is from Knuckles again. He puts in another $20 and says, "Also, to answer two things from yesterday, the land bridge I was speaking of, Fox News was saying if Russia gets Mariupol, it will give them an unbroken land bridge from Russia to Crimea. Also, this is not my regular account, spelt different."
Got you. And thank you very much for the support once again. But as far as Fox, I don't know. I don't really understand where they're coming up with this. Because you see, they already have a land bridge to Crimea from Russia. You know, they have one down here at Kerch. And also, they can just bypass Mariupol because they control all the roads outside of it. And they can still drive to Crimea from there. I don't really know where Fox was coming from saying that, because it doesn't make much sense. Mariupol is just a city that's important for its ports. You know, that's really the only reason the Russians want it, is so that way they can use the ports as kind of like a logistics part of their chain, kind of like how they were using Berdyansk until the kind of like basing point there got obliterated. So I don't really know why Fox said that. I think that's them, of course, trying to hype something up. You know, like, oh, Mariupol's going to fall in a few days and it's going to make a land bridge. Because that doesn't really make any sense when you look at it in the big picture. They kind of already have the land bridge due to the amount of land they've captured up here. But I thank you very much for the support once again. And that's kind of my input on what they said, because when you really look at the situation, it doesn't make much sense. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Darren Driscoll, who puts in a donation of $20. And says, "Awesome job, guys. And that being said, what are the chances of these Russian soldiers who have committed war crimes actually going to trial? Slava Ukraine."
I'm not particularly sure, because I don't really know if the Ukrainians have been able to compile evidence. Maybe they're trying to get like eyewitness reports from civilians about who committed these crimes and maybe get some kind of names or faces to go with them. And then they start going through the prisoners that they have. And they're trying to see which people match the description, if any of them do. Maybe that's how they're going to try and bring these war criminals to justice, but at the moment, I'm not really sure as to the processes of how they're going to identify names and faces with these war crimes, considering that it doesn't really seem like there's a lot of documentation as to what Russian soldiers in particular are committing them. So that's kind of what I've been getting from this at the moment right now, and I thank you very much for the support and hope that answers the question. And so we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a comment from Tito McLovin, who is now a longtime channel supporter. He puts in a donation of $10 and says, 3 Mi-28s perform a perfect offensive strike in Russia with minimal lives lost, and the Kremlin cries foul, question mark. Putin hits Ukraine with daily strikes killing civilians, but that's okay. Crimea, River Putin.
Yeah, I mean, like, the Russians play a double standard. Usually all countries do. And, you know, it doesn't really make sense at all when the Russians do it, and you can see it from, like, a third-person perspective and say, well, that's kind of dumb, because they didn't even kill any civilians in their raid at Belgorod. By the way, I think they were, like, 2 or 3 Mi-24s, not Mi-28s. I think those were only Russian-owned. And also in the video we saw Mi-24s. But, yeah, I would have to agree. It's really dumb that the Russians complain about that, considering that they've been striking oil depots all over Ukraine, and we also saw them strike an oil refinery today in Kremenchuk. But at the same time, they're going to whine over spilled oil in Belgorod. It makes no sense to me, and I have to agree with you that the Russians are very hypocritical in what they say and do. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that addresses the comment in a way, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from George, New York's premier contractor, a longtime channel supporter. He puts in a donation of $10 and says, by the way, haven't missed a single stream. Did UA really attack Belgorod? Do we now have a long war in the Donbass? Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraina. And thank you very much for not missing a single stream. You know, I wish that there was something I could give out to longtime supporters of the channel. We are looking into that at the moment. We're seeing if that is a possibility. But to address the question, yes, the Ukrainians did strike the oil refineries in Belgorod. That's been pretty much made clear at this point that they were the ones who did it, although they're not willing to step forward and take the credit for it, because I'm sure that they're scared that the Russians will start to try and commit reprisals against their countries, and they've already faced many of them. So I think that they're not wanting to take credit for it, although they certainly did it. There's clear and undeniable evidence that they did do it. And so, yes, it is true that they actually did strike that oil silo. And I do thank you very much for being a longtime supporter of this channel and always being here. And I thank you once again for the support. It helps our channel continue to run. And so people like you are the reason why this is able to come on every night and why this channel will have a future. And so I thank you so much once again. It means a lot to me. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quickly, I just want to recognize 2 $10 donations. We have one from Louise Salmeron, and we have one from Wireless One. Thank you both for your support of the channel. And moving on, we have a question from Diffuse56, who puts in a $10 donation and says, wouldn't it be cool if someone with YouTube/editing skills made a compilation video of Russians engaged in stupid fails, guys falling off their tanks, running around in a Chinese fire drill, etc.?
Yeah, I have to agree. That would be pretty neat. I think that would be something I would include on stream, of course, because I'm all into making the Russians look dumb, because they are. And, you know, I would love, now this is a personal request, if anyone's actually going to start working on that, I would love for y'all to include that one clip, I think it was from yesterday, where that Russian soldier busted his teeth out on the grill of that BMP-2 as he was running across the front of it, and he tripped over the barrel of the gun, and he just fell, and it looked like the rim of his upper teeth just slammed right into the angled side of a vent, and it was the funniest thing. I don't really think he had to worry about that too long, honestly, when you look at the video, but that was the goofiest thing I've ever seen, is that the guy got so freaked out he busted his teeth out on top of that BMP. So make sure to include that if anyone's going to work on that. But I thank you very much for the support, and I think that would be cool. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question tonight goes to James Lynn, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, remember, the Russians still have a lot of air power. Any movement east is going to be detected. Any large movements by the Ukrainians on the roads are going to be attacked.
You know, they may have air power, yes, but we can see that they're not really using it to its fullest extent, and we know why now. It's because they've lost 143 aircraft just in the process of using it lightly, and so we don't really know the actual success rate of the sorties that the Russians are committing, because considering that they've lost that many aircraft, and in the let's do this, the Gulf War, how many coalition aircraft were lost in, oh, we spelled lost really bad, lost in the Gulf War? 75 aircraft, 52 fixed wing, and 23 helicopters. So the actual number over the entirety of the Gulf War was 52 aircraft. Right now, a month and a week into this war, the Russians have lost 143. And just to put into context, we're also going to put in lost in the Iraq invasion. Let's get a number on that as well, because right now, according to 129 helicopters and 24 fixed-wing aircraft were lost in Iraq in between 2003 and 2009. Okay, so we'll put that in perspective now. That is the course of 6 years of fighting in Iraq. You know, there was the invasion, which was the heaviest part of the fighting, and then afterwards it was kind of like low intensity against like rebel groups and such. But 129 helicopters and 24 fixed-wing aircraft is how much we lost over 6 years in Iraq. And if we go back here to the casualty report, which I'll put up side by side with that one, we can see that the Russians have lost 143 planes and 134 helicopters. So they've already lost more helicopters than we did over 6 years in Iraq. And they've lost, like 6 times the amount of aircraft that we lost over 6 years in Iraq. That tells you how badly it's going for them. And so I don't think they're able to really exercise their air superiority a lot, because we can see that it's actually very fragile when put up in the face of ground AA, because it seems like they're shooting them down at an incredibly high rate. So that's kind of like my input on that. And on top of that, even if that was the case and the Russian air superiority would just smother everything that tried to head that direction, how come that hasn't been the case in the northern fronts and the eastern fronts when Ukrainian forces have been moving in large numbers over large areas? The Air Force should have been able to destroy those troops as well, and I don't think that will change here in the southeastern area as well. So that's kind of my input on it, but I thank you very much for the interesting perspective. It is something to be considered, and so I thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another chat from BSG Wolf, who I will mention is a longtime channel supporter, putting in a donation of $20 and saying, if Putin gives up the Donbass in exchange for Crimea, how do you think he will spend it for the Russian people?
He'll spin it as our core objectives were achieved. We made sure that the Crimean Ukrainians were safe and liberated from fascism, and the Donetsk and Luhansk republics turned against us. But it's okay, everyone. We'll try and get them in the future, and then they never will. I think that may be the way they try and spin it. But then again, that's kind of like an off-the-cuff answer. I haven't really thought about that a lot. If they were to try and trade them for one, one for the other, not really sure how that would actually go. But that's kind of my assumption just off the bat of how they would try and explain that. We'd, of course, have to see the interesting and sick spin they'll put on it in the end, because we were really not sure which way it could go. But I thank you very much for the question. I hope that answers it in a way, at least as to my opinion, as to what would happen. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And moving on to the next one, we have a question from Scott Ingerman, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, MSNBC has uploaded a few hours ago that Ukraine officials are drafting a peace treaty document. Love your stream and how you try to present the truth. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much for the support. And I have heard a little bit about that. And I wonder if that is the case, because if that is so, it may be within 1-2 days or maybe just about a week from now, or somewhere in between, that we'll actually be seeing the end of these daily streams and the end of the war. Now, that's going to be a night to celebrate when we see the end of this war, because I've been here ever since the first day of this war. Actually, the first few hours. You can go back and watch the streams then. They were kind of the same, but not really. And I was literally here within the first hour of the missiles falling inside of Ukraine and the Russians launching their invasion and attacking the border guards. And I was here for that, and I've been here every single day since. And so it'll be something to really see the end of this war. It hasn't been long, but it has been bloody, and it has been well fought on the side of the Ukrainians. And so I look forward to the day that this war will end. And so I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And just to let everybody know, if you have put a question in, don't worry, it is in the spreadsheet. We will ask it before the stream ends tonight, so don't be worried, it is coming up. Next up, we have a question from The Watcher. I believe that's one of our mods, actually, putting in a donation of $5. Do you think Ukraine will or should get Crimea back? Rock on, freaky bro.
Well, thank you very much for the support. And to answer that question, I think that Ukraine will have a very hard time trying to get Crimea back. The Russians did annex it and consider it to be a Russian state, and so they're kind of treating it now like sovereign Russian territory that will permanently be Russian, and so it may be really hard for them to try and reclaim that, because the Russians will argue that that's sovereign land and that's not really on the table for taking. So that's kind of my position on it, but I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question in a way. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And moving on to the next one, we have a question from Robert Heath, who puts in a donation of $10. He says, what about reducing the salience protruding into Ukraine?
I think the Ukrainians are already focusing on that right now. We see that they are pushing them back on the roadway, the breakthrough road from Novobasan back towards Romny. I think that may be pronounced more like that. But they are trying to push them back through that breakthrough area. And we know that the Russians at this point have pretty much given up on Kyiv, because we can see that this entire northern front has fallen apart here. And so I'm sure they're not going to try and push the entire attack on one axis down this one roadway, the EU40. Well, the H07, actually. And so I thank you very much for the support. I think they are trying to fix that right now, including the areas of Troishinets, Izium, and so on. And so we'll just have to wait and see the amount of progress they have with that. And so with that, once again, I thank you very much for the support and helping out this channel. It means a lot to me, and I hope I answered that question in a good way for you. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question comes in from Pirate Llama Recording Studio, who puts in a donation of $20 and says, if the rumor that Putin may be dying of cancer or mentally ill, and Russia continues to get their ass kicked, what are the chances Putin tries to do something even crazier than this? Thanks for your hard work. You rock.
Thank you very much for the support, and you rock. No, you're the one who rocks for watching the stream and helping me continue to do this. So I thank you so much for your support again, man. And to answer that question, I think that he's not going to do anything too extreme, because, you know, it's been on the table now. When the Russians started getting beat the first time, everyone was saying, oh man, he's going to do something wild, you know, he's not used to losing, he's going to nuke him. And then he didn't. And so I don't think that's ever going to happen, considering that it sounds like the peace talks are going in a good direction. And let's see this. Let's type that in. Ukraine peace talk talk. So we're just going to put that in. Let's see. There's the thing saying full control of Kyiv. That's the entire Oblast. Let's see here. Russia-Ukraine peace talks have advanced to a point where a meeting between Russia and Ukraine can commence. That's what that's saying. Now, let's see if we type in news. Will we get anything more recent? Let's see here. All right, so it looks like they are making some kind of progress. We can get that at least. And could you repeat that question to me again, Matthew, to make sure that I cover all parts of it?
Let's see here. Let me see if I can get back to it. Let's see. I think it might have disappeared for the moment.
Ah, well, that's fine. Anyways, it does look like the peace talks are going in a somewhat good direction right now. It seems like it's being indicated that they are heading more towards the peaceful direction, like the Russians are actually looking at resolving this. And so to answer the question, I don't think he's going to be doing anything more extreme, even if he is dying. I think at this point he's just resigned that he's going to give this thing up if it goes towards that direction, and that'll just be the end of it. And so I hope I answered that question pretty well. It actually came right back to my head right when I asked him what the question was, what it was. So I hope I answered that question pretty well for you, and I thank you once again so much for the support. You're the one who rocks here, not me. So with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and next up, we just got a question in from Trademarks and Patents for Growing Businesses, which most people will know is a longtime channel supporter. He puts in a donation of $25 and says, good job, guys. I'll miss you live next week while I'm traveling, but my question is, how do you see the next week playing out? Why? And are you still predicting troop movements based on the roads?
Yes, I am still predicting troop movements based off of roads. Roadways have been a major part of military operations since Roman times, when they constructed the large roadworks across all of Rome and would use them to move the legions around incredibly quickly. That's also why the roads back in the day, because the roads, like the interstate system here in the United States, were built off of the main excuse that they were for military reasons, but then they started being used more by civilians than the military. But to answer that question, yes, roadways are always important. They've always been historically the main arteries of militaries and armies as they move, and so I base most of my offensives off of the roadways and where they are. The Ukrainians seem to be using a more spread out approach than just trying to push down major roadways like the Russians do, but the things I see happening in the next week is that the Russians will probably be pushed back to Romny at least, and this little breakthrough kind of like bulge will be crushed. I think that we're going to see in the Chernihiv area that this pocket will also collapse as well, because if the Russians gave up their most advantageous side of this front, where they were actually just miles from Kyiv, we know that this is no longer an objective of the Russians as well. And so I think that this will collapse by the Ukrainians pushing them out and the Russians withdrawing as well. The next bit of news that I see happening is that I see Kherson becoming a major battleground again. I think we're going to see the Ukrainians either push the Russians out of the city, or the Russians will hold the city, and those are the main things that I'll predict will happen within the next week. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that answers the question. I hate to hear that you'll be traveling next week and won't be able to watch the streams a lot. I know that you're a big fan of them, and so I know you do enjoy watching them, and so I hope that you'll be able to find the free time somewhere to watch them, and I'll make sure to remember you while we're doing the streams next week when you're not here. So I thank you once again for the support, Trademarks and Patents, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Adam the Great, who puts in a donation of $20 and says, how come we haven't heard anything from any Russian Americans about what their thoughts are on the war in Ukraine?
I don't really know why we haven't heard anything. It's really interesting to me. Maybe people just don't really care about their input, because the thing is that I'm a technically British American. And, if Britain did something, really, what weigh-in do I have on British politics? Ancestrally, I'm British, but I don't really have anything tied to being British. Maybe you're talking about Russian American immigrants who are still, like, Russian born and raised, and that would be interesting. I don't really know why we haven't been hearing any inputs on their part about what they're thinking about it. Maybe they aren't good, and maybe so they're not being publicized. I'm not entirely sure, but there's a whole lot of ground that could be discussed in that regard, so I really can't go in a clear direction with it as to what I would even think, because maybe it's just that people don't care, or maybe they're pro-Russian, or maybe they're not Russian, but no one really cares anyways. I don't really know. There's just a lot of avenues for that to go down. But I thank you very much for the support, and once again, you are a longtime supporter of this channel, and so I thank you so much. You continue to help this channel run daily, and that means a lot to me. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question goes to Junebug72, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, my heart is hurting more as I find no answers to such devastation nor endgame. It's absolutely senseless, heartless, and prayers are up. Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraina, and I do agree with you completely. This whole entire war has been senseless on the part of the Russians. Their official reasons for entering it are stupid. Their actual reasons for entering this war, the ones behind the scenes where they're actually trying to ensure their strategic longevity, is also pretty dumb, because they don't really have any strategic advantage anymore over anyone anywhere, and so it's really pointless for them to try and push that. And so really, the whole entire thing is senseless. I have to agree with that entirely. And I hate that this is happening to Ukraine, and I hope that soon in the future, this war will come to a close. And so I thank you so much for the support, and I do entirely agree with you. And I pray for Ukraine as well. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Russ Paulus for a donation of $18. And he says, any word on Wally the sniper?
We did get some word on him a while ago. We found out that he's alive, and then apparently he wasn't doing a lot of sniping. He was doing a lot more scouting in the northern area around Kyiv. And we can now talk about that with relative safety. He was somewhere up there in Kyiv, and he was reporting the positions of Russian units, and he was helping kind of give a lot of intel to the Ukrainian units that were conducting counterattacks. While I think that he did have a decent bit of relevance in reporting information of troop movements and such, I feel like this is kind of that thing that the British perpetrated in World War II, where they said, oh, our pilots can see the German fighter planes in the dark because they eat carrots and it helps them see better. I feel like that's kind of the same thing here, because we know that the U.S. and American companies have been, I'm sorry, I just butchered it, have been providing the Ukrainians with satellite footage, which probably helped them out a lot more than just Wally. But once again, I can't discredit Wally for all he's done. He's put his neck out there to get intel and information on the Russians and their locations on that front, and so I'm sure that he had a large contributing factor to it as well. I just think that in the long term, the satellites were able to cover a much larger area and show the actual situation much more clearly to the Ukrainians than just one guy on the ground who can probably see a few miles out in certain vantage points. But still, nonetheless, his efforts were great help, and we haven't gotten any information on him from that point on. So we don't really know what he's doing or where he's gone, but we do know that he is still alive and he is well, and that he's doing a decent amount of help for Ukraine. And so I hope that answers your question in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a chat from Beef Taco, who puts in a donation of $18 and says, reshifting all resources to a concentrated area is a good strategy. Any chance Russia will converge on Donetsk, for example, and then slowly roll across the south to Odessa, cutting a swath that take 25% of Ukraine?
No, I don't really see that, because you see, the thing is that if they lift up all of their resources around the rest of the country and they send them all down there, why wouldn't the Ukrainians just counter them and send most of their forces down there? They would have advanced information before it would happen if the Russians were once again planning some kind of quick thrust through the north towards Kyiv again, because we know that the United States is constantly providing them with satellite footage and pictures showing Russian troop movements and locations. So they would be well aware of any kind of Russian advances back towards the north again long before they happened. So they would be free to move most of their units down to the south as well. And so this would just become a heavily populated, hard fought over, like, meat grinder in a way down here in the southeast. And I just don't see the Russians doing, you know, because everyone's always talking about, you know, always trying to find a way for the Russians to not lose this mythical status, you know, in like history, and say, oh, the Russians will manage to do something down here. It's just not going to happen. You know, this is what they said with the 40-mile-long convoy. They said, oh, look, they've thrown in a load of resources up here, you know, 40 miles long worth of convoy, and they're just going to go into Kyiv and steamroll the thing. And now, look, the whole entire front collapsed, and that did nothing to help it. And so I think that's what will actually happen down here in the south. They put more stuff down there, and it's just going to strain the logistical situation even further. And they're not going to gain any more progress, because the Ukrainians will also relocate their resources down there to counter this Russian invasion in a way. Well, this Russian push. And so I hope that is a decent opinion that answers the question, at least as far as what I'm thinking about it. And so with that being said, I thank you very much for the support once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quickly, I just want to recognize a $50 donation from Mike Smith. Thank you, Mike. That is incredibly generous, and we do appreciate the support. That is very, very generous.
Wait a minute, you said Mike?
Mike Smith.
Oh, that's not Moscow Mike. I was thinking that Moscow Mike might have turned to leaf, but it appears that this is a different Mike we're hearing from. I thank you so much, Mike Smith, for the support. You had me scared there for a minute that Moscow Mike had actually turned to leaf and joined their side, but I'm glad to know that you're supporting the channel, and I thank you very much. It helps us to continue to run it. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Yeah, and trust me, we'd much rather have Mike Smith than Moscow Mike.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So our next question of the night is from Paul Heil. He puts in a donation of $20 and says, I understand logistics for the invading forces are much more difficult, but how in the world did Russia mess this up so bad? Incompetence, corruption, or just a result of Ukrainian forces' resilience catching them off guard?
It's a combination of all of them, to make the answer somewhat brief, but I will go into it in detail. The Russian forces are corrupt. We know that clearly, because where in the world did the budgeting for the military go? I mean, like, even at like $60 billion a year, it doesn't look like a $60 billion a year budget army. So I'm assuming that a decent amount of corruption was involved in that. And we can see that the conscripts training and some of the contract soldiers, because we had a decent idea that Russia said at the beginning of the war they had been sending in almost nothing but contract soldiers, and those were performing poorly. So I feel like their lack of training was due to corruption. The incompetence side of things also falls into the training and how they actually operate. We can see that as weeks go by, the Russians actually learn nothing in terms of changing their tactics, because they're getting destroyed week after week using the exact same tactics they were using on day one. So that's incompetence into that degree. And then the staunch resistance of the Ukrainians is a fact, because the Russians landed 200 VDV troops at Hostomel, and this is just one example. There's loads of examples, and this isn't the linchpin example, but this is the best one. They landed 200 troops at the Hostomel airport without any support and expected them to hold it until the Russians could get down there. And that showed you how little resistance the Russians expected from the Ukrainians in this kind of like annexation as to how they were looking at it of Ukraine. And so those three things combined have led to the Russians pretty much falling apart. And they have not had any sort of resurge or any sort of improvement in their situation. Things just keep on getting worse from here, and there's no sign at all of it ever changing. So that's kind of my input on it. I thank you very much for the question. That was a very good, well-rounded question. I like that one. and to answer it, it includes all 3 points that you asked about. So thank you very much for the support once again, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And the next question of the night goes to S. Moore, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, "Ever smoke a sockeye salmon? Hard to get lit, but a holiday fair in the PNW. Have lunch on me."
Well, thank you very much. The sockeye salmon thing, one day I want you to actually explain to me what that is about, because me and Matthew are always wondering, what is the sockeye salmon thing about? But anyways, I thank you very much for the offer. I do eat salmon, so it is pretty good. I don't know about sockeye salmon, though, but maybe I'll try that out sometime. So I thank you very much for the support once again. And before we move on, how many super chats do we have left, Matthew?
So let's see. It looks like we have, including the one that just came in, about 20 of them.
All right, so we're going to have to make a cutoff for tonight because this stream has officially reached 2 hours in length, and I'm sure that with the 20 super chats or so, it'll take us until like another hour to answer them all. So we're going to make it the cutoff right here. I thank you all very much for the support, and if you would like to support the stream and you like what we're doing, make sure to subscribe and also click the bell button so that way you can be here tomorrow. We will be running a fundraiser stream tomorrow, so I would much rather have you all support Ukraine, and the charity will pick tomorrow than me. So make sure to come back and do that instead, because I think that would be incredibly nice of y'all to do. And also, one more thing before we move on, is that if you do want to support the channel, even with me saying this, we won't be able to answer the question if you have one. So if you would like to put down a super chat and it does have a question, we're not going to be able to get to it beyond this point. So I thank you very much for the support once again if you do support the channel beyond this point. But with that, we're going to move on to the questions we have. We'll recognize everyone who does give a super chat after the closing time, but we won't be able to answer the questions, and then we'll answer some questions from the live chat. And so with that, what else do we have, Matthew?
Okay, and next up we have a longtime channel supporter who used to go by a different name, but now wants to be known as just Speed Break. For his own safety, he doesn't want his name out there any longer. He puts in a donation of $10 and says, "Coffee Fund, keep up the great work."
Well, thank you very much, Speed Break. We're not going to publicize your name anymore. I thought that was pretty bold of you to do that, but I'm not one to judge. I think that was actually pretty bold of you. I liked it. And also your name was very unique. But since you want to be called Speed Break now, we'll make sure to do that. And so I thank you very much for the coffee fund. Once again, it helps me to keep very energetic at night, doing this thing way late into the night. So I thank you once again, Mark. I'm sorry, Speed Break. You've always been here for us. And so I thank you once again for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from M90 Regal Grand Sport, who puts in a donation of $10. It says, "Russia would get destroyed ruthlessly by any third world African military."
They would. I have to agree with that. They probably would. They're hardly able to even stand up to Ukraine. And while Ukraine is full of very strong people, the honest truth is that they're not the best military in the world. I mean, like, budget-wise, they're not. And that tells you how bad off the Russians are, is that they can't even fight minor powers in Europe like Ukraine. But anyways, moving on from that, that's not anything to discredit the Ukrainians. We've seen that they've been fighting like wild animals at this point, like Wolverines, like that movie that we had come out in the 80s, and then once again in like 2010, the terrible version of it. But they've been fighting incredibly hard, and I have to say that these people have put themselves on the world stage as some of the best fighters on Earth in modern history. So I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question from BC Skyman once again, who puts in another $10 donation. He says, "I have been here for over 30 days, and you're doing a great job. I predict that China and India will be the next big customer of Russian oil and gas. So my question is, why is India backing Russia?"
India is backing Russia because politically and militarily, they've been kind of aligned with the Russians for a while, more so than the West. Most of their vehicles, like helicopters and tanks and such, are Russian-based in a way, Soviet-based in a way. And so they have to make sure that their supply chains for these vehicles can be maintained, and so they're trying to keep friendly with Russians. And then on top of that, they may be seeing a new avenue for them to get resources much cheaper from the Russians now, and so that may be why they're trying to align in that direction. But I think the U.S. needs to put their foot down to the Indians and the Pakistanis, as well as the Chinese, and make it clear that any cooperation with the Russians on their behalf will also result in them being sanctioned incredibly heavily. we have to put a stop to this kind of stuff around the world. And if we're not willing to stand up to these countries and tell them that they too cannot side with the Russians, that will be showing that our sanctions can just be subverted in a way. And so I thank you very much for the support. That's kind of my opinion on the matter. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and our next question up is from Greg Carmen, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, can and should the Ukrainians move forces east to expected Russian consolidation attack there?
They might want to. I mean, it's not really something that's imperative right now. They do have to make sure, of course, that the Russians have left for good in the northern area, and it will take the Russians a while once these forces get moved down here into the south to actually prepare and then move in. You know, whenever forces move to an area, it's not immediate that they move straight to the front. If you look at stories from any war, it's usually like a week or two before they actually move into the combat in a way. So it will be some time, and they will have time to prepare. But yes, I do think it would be better for the Ukrainians to be prepared for the Russian push instead of having to react to it. But, you know, we'll just have to wait and see what's best for them as the information comes out. But I do thank you for the support and the interesting input in that regard. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quickly, I just want to mention that some people have said in the chat that they think I'm Hickok 45. I just want to put that rumor to rest. I am not Hickok 45. I wish I had all of his guns, but I am not him. But anyways, moving on to the next question, we have from DC90, who puts in a donation of $10. And they say, with the recapture of Hostomel, do you think Ukraine will move their remaining interceptor and CAS aircraft out of that direction in support of the southern front?
They may. I don't really talk about Ukrainian troop movements and locations much, because sometimes, I mean, it's not all the time. I'm not like getting everything perfectly right over here. Some things do come out wrong. But as far as what the Russians did, I predicted that stuff spot on over the first 2 or 3 weeks, like exactly what their plans were. And we saw them kind of like acquiesce, and then we saw them get destroyed. And so I don't really want to talk about what the Ukrainians might do, because my fear is, what if I get that right on the head, and I'm pretty much telling the Russians exactly what the Ukrainians are doing? That's something I'm kind of scared about doing, and so I don't really want to talk about what they'll do. So I hope I answered that question at the start of this a little bit, but I don't want to, like, say with certainty anything that I'm actually thinking inside my head, just in case the Russians are watching, because just in case you haven't been around for a while, a lot of my return viewers, and say it in the chat if you were here, actually saw that one day the Russians pretty much copied this map verbatim, and actually put it up as a Ministry of Defense briefing, which was very weird to me. It may have just been coincidence, but at the same time it was just so oddly similar that it was really hard to see where it would just be mere coincidence. So I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Rich Hogan, who is now a longtime channel supporter, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, great stream once again. I always look forward to it.
Well, I thank you very much for the support once again. I'm glad that you enjoyed the stream. I don't say this much anymore because, you know, once you do something for a very long time, you don't really think about it all too much. But I am more than honored. I'm incredibly honored that everyone picks my stream out of everyone else's that they could watch to come and listen to the news. I find that to be just something incredible, that thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, get on here every night and they enjoy the news I give them and they want to hear it. And that's something to me that used to hit me incredibly hard at the beginning of these streams when they actually got big. And it still hits me often now. It's just that it doesn't hit me to the same level because I've kind of gotten used to it. But just know that I'm always so appreciative of everyone who always comes and watches my streams, because I do it for y'all, and I'm just glad that y'all enjoy it. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. It means a lot to me. And we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night goes to Andrew Parker, who says, Russians failed in Kyiv and failed at shutting down this stream.
I do have to agree, they failed, apparently. I don't know exactly what was going on. I was told over message, you know, in the middle of the stream that it appeared to have been a DDoS attack. So we're looking into that and seeing what happened with that specifically. We might be able to get some more information on that later. But that was something interesting to me that occurred, and it looks like they failed at that because the stream's still up, y'all, and we're still going at it. So if the Russians were trying to shut this thing down, they failed at that as well. They're losing on every front, including the one that is this channel. So I thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Peter Stevens, who says Putin is looking to move to the Arctic for oil and reserves. Is Canada the next target?
No, I mean Canada. No way. I mean, like, think about the logistics of trying to manage something like that. And on top of that, do you think America would stand for Canada being the next target? No, not at all. No, that would be something that never happened. I'm sorry, but Russia attacking Canada and making that their next target? No way. I mean, I could never see that happening. But I thank you very much for the support. I hope they answered that question in a way, and it didn't come off too abrasive. It's just that I could never see Russia making Canada a target. That's something that I will never see in the future, ever. Canada is pretty much an extension of the United States politically in a way, and the United States has a severe strategic interest in making sure that Canada stays Canadian, and, stays the way it is. So I thank you very much for the support, and then I hope I answered that question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And the next one is from Sean Moran, who says Australian Bushmaster armored vehicles heading to Ukraine. They sound interesting.
Let's pull up those Bushmaster armored vehicles and take a look at them. Bushmaster armored. Come on, armored vehicle. Okay, I'm butchering the spelling. Oh, those are the armored vehicles that the cops were using in the video. Wow, these things look cool. I mean, I know you probably can't see this on stream, Matthew, because there's a lag, but wow, these are actually some mean-looking, like, MRAP kind of vehicles. Now, that's something. I like those. I don't know if they're sending in more. We know that the Ukrainians apparently already have some because the police forces, the elite police forces, are using them. But if the Australians are sending them more, that's good news because these things, they look very good. I don't know performance-wise how good they actually do. But just looking at their appearance, these are some mean-looking vehicles. I would like to have one of these. So I thank you very much for the support and bringing that up. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question up is from Maximad, who is a longtime channel supporter. He says, Ukraine column in location unknown is early war footage apparently in the comments. It's being disputed there, and Russia just throwing it out there.
Interesting, and thank you very much for the info. And with that being said, I thank you for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another longtime channel supporter, OG Wakanobi. He says, Kyiv was always a feint. The real goal is the Sea of Azov and the Donbass. Anything else is a bonus.
No, I'd have to disagree, because when we saw them originally pushing during the first days of the war, and, I guess... And I mean, I'm not saying that I'm in a position of experience here, but I have been here for 38 days watching this war unfold. Their first two objectives, their primary objectives, was the city of Kyiv and Kharkiv. They were trying to encircle them and put them under siege and pressure the Ukrainian government into a surrender, so that way hundreds of thousands of people wouldn't be in the line of fire and possibly get killed or starve to death or die of thirst or something like that. That was the main goal. And by doing that, they didn't have to actively try and invade and take over the areas in the south of Ukraine. They could really ask for whatever they wanted to because they'd have Ukraine in a chokehold. And so the Ukrainians wouldn't be able to refuse anything. That was the original goal. None of this stuff up here was a feint because most of the forces in the country were based out of the Kharkiv and Kyiv areas. And so, that's kind of how it actually unfolded in the first week of the war. And I don't really want to lose that perspective because while the Southern Front appears to become more and more important now, it was a sideshow. And during the first few weeks of this war, Kyiv and Kharkiv were the main sources of fighting in the entire country and the main place that most troops were on the Russian side. So I thank you very much for the support, but that's my input on it. And could you read me back the last part of that question, Matthew, to make sure that I got everything covered in it?
Yeah, he said the real goal is the Sea of Azov and the Donbass, and that anything else was a bonus.
All right, so I just want to make sure I cover that completely. So I hope I answered that in a pretty good point. That's kind of my stance on it. I don't really think they're going for... I mean, they are going for the Donbass in a way. That's kind of clear. We've known that since the start. But the whole entire Sea of Azov, I mean, I don't really think they're going for all of it. I think they're going to try and get Mariupol because, of course, it's in the Donbass, but... Beyond that, Bryansk, I don't really think they care about it, and I don't think they care about anything else. So I thank you very much for the support. Hope that answers the question in a way, at least on my opinion. And then once again, this is all my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. I'm not saying this is the way it is, but that's how I'm looking at it. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And our next question is from Mech Tactical, who says, looks like DDoS attack, activate VPN. I have seen this before. And I will just say a comment on that really quickly. We do have internet outages here, just like anybody else, but that did have kind of the symptoms of a DDoS or of a denial of service attack. But obviously, we don't know that right now. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was. We've been streaming for over 30 days, I believe now.
38.
Well over 30 days. Yeah. So I'm surprised we haven't been attacked before now. We get phishing attempts every single day. So obviously they want to try to take us down in some way or another. So I wouldn't be surprised. But that's just my two bits on it.
All right. And with that being said, thank you for the input, Matthew. And we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and next up, we have a $10 donation from M90 Regal Grand Sport. And this one did come in after the cutoff. I'm going to go ahead and read it anyway. They say, why has Russia always been completely and utterly subordinate and subservient to the West? Have they always been inferior? Einstein and Da Vinci said it was an intelligence and work ethic issue.
Well, it's not really a racial thing per se. It's really more of a technological issue that they've been facing for hundreds of years, you see, because culturally, it's not anything to do with the people. It's something to do more so with their culture. Culturally, Russia was the farthest Eastern European country, and while there was a powerhouse kind of over here in Western Europe in between the British, the Germans, the French, and the Italians, and they kind of had all the technological manpower and thinking power in the European world, the Russians were at the very edge of this frontier. And so they were always the last to get any kind of cultural or social developments, while the rest of Europe was just, powering on ahead. So they were almost like a feudal society all the way up until the 1700s, when Tsar Peter tried to westernize Russia in a way and try and bring it up to a Western European standard. He was somewhat successful, but not entirely. And so technologically and culturally, just because they were like on the frontier of Europe, and they're kind of considered outcasts in a way from the rest of Europe because their culture was very different than Western Europe. They just continued to stay culturally and technologically behind all the way up through the Tsardom, all the way to the Russian Civil War. Then during the Soviet times, after the Russian Civil War, the Russians continued to try and get up to speed culturally and technologically with the Western, well, not really culturally anymore. They tried to attack Western culture in a way and say it wasn't good, but technologically they still tried to keep up. And in the process, we could see that they never really got up to the same point, because in the 70s, no. I'm sorry. Let me go through that again. In the 80s, when the United States was really getting ahead technologically, the Russians were able to resemble it in a way, but they weren't really able to capture the same level of technological progress that the West was achieving at all, even in consumer goods. And so that's kind of continued all the way up till today, but it's not anything like racial inferiority or anything like that. It's just more to do with culturally, they've always been having to try and play catch up with the West, just because they've been so removed from the process of technological progress and innovation and cultural progress and innovation that the Western European countries have endured in their successes. So that's kind of my answer on that. I thank you very much for the question. It is an interesting one to delve into, and I would highly suggest everyone to read Russian history, because if you want to understand who the Russians are and where they've come from, the most important thing to do with every country is to read their history, and then you can see their limitations, their successes, and everything in between. And so I thank you very much for the question. It was an interesting one, and I thank you for the support. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation that just came in from Mary Erickson. Thank you very much, Mary, for the support. We do appreciate it very much. And the next question we have is from OG Wakanobi once again. He says, I still won't be happy until I see Wolverines spray painted across a burnt out T-72.
I have to agree. That would be pretty neat to see. But one thing I thought was the coolest thing was the Welcome to Kharkiv truck. If none of y'all play Welcome to, Escape from Tarkov, now that's a video game, and I know that a lot of people don't go down that rabbit hole of super realistic games, but let me pull up the Escape from Tarkov truck. I'm sorry, not truck key. Oops. Escape from Tarkov truck. Let me just pull up the images and let me see if I can find it. This truck here. This is a Russian, like, some kind of transport truck, and it says on the side, Welcome to Tarkov. So I believe that there was actually the same kind of Russian armored vehicle that said Welcome to Kharkiv on the side of it, and someone actually painted that on the side of the truck. Yes, right here. This is it. Someone painted on the side of this truck the exact same thing that was on this truck. It says, "Welcome to Kharkiv." And, you know, if you say it in the Russian pronunciation, it's "Welcome to Kharkov," which is almost the same thing. It was very cool, very weird to see. So that kind of has happened in a way, but not exactly. But I thank you very much for the support, and that would be cool to see one day. But, you know, one can only hope. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quickly, I want to recognize a $5 donation from Winston Segner. Thank you, Winston. We appreciate it. The next question we have is from Adam Lee Fox, who says, Ukraine got a massive shipment of tanks today from NATO. Now that Kyiv is liberated, do you foresee a new MiG/SU deal from NATO? Do you know of any more deals?
I don't know of any more deals concerning aircraft at the moment. I think that kind of stuff has died. But as far as the ground equipment has gone, nothing has died in that regard. And the West keeps on trying to push the limit as to how far they can go before the Russians put their foot down and say we're not going to allow that kind of stuff. So with the aircraft, I haven't heard anything new about that. I think that's largely died. No one's even looking into that anymore. But as far as ground equipment is gone, we can see that the West just keeps on giving and there's no signs of stopping, which is great news. And so I hope that's answered your question in a way, and I thank you very much for the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question we have is from Yaka, I believe is how it's said. They say Slava Kiev, Slava Ukraine, and Slava the Enforcer.
Oh, thank you very much. That's really neat. And Slava, you're a pretty nice guy. And I thank you very much for supporting Ukraine and this channel. It means a lot to me. And, you know, once again, I hate to give the same spill every time, but it's pretty much the same way I feel about all of them. You're helping me run the channel, and that means a lot to me. And you don't know how much it means to me because this has become my job in a way. Well, actually, it is my job. It's my only job right now. And so it makes me very happy to know that I'll be able to keep on doing it and that people do appreciate the work that I'm putting into this. And so thank you so much once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Jeraminator, who has been around quite a while. I guess he is a longtime channel supporter. He says, looks like the Ukraine put the wrong dates on that losses chart. It says 2-24 through 3-2.
Hang on, let me go look at that again. Because it is an up-to-date one because the numbers are an April 2nd kind of number. Interesting. Let me go check that out. I think that may have been something they put down wrong. Kyiv Independent. Russian losses April 2nd. Let's see if the Kyiv Independent's got this. Yeah, see, look, they've posted it as April 2nd. And these are the exact same numbers that were posted on the other website. Well, the other post here, as you can see. And it says March 2nd. I think that was just a typo, because here it says April 2nd, and it's the exact same numbers. So thank you for pointing that out. But tonight, you're not going to get me this time, y'all. That is accurate, up-to-date information. It just appears that they had a typo on it. And so I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you brought that up so that way we could look into it and make sure that I wasn't reporting false information. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one goes to John Devaney, who says, U.S. and Canada use Stryker vehicles.
They do, and the Stryker vehicles are pretty neat as well. Let me pull that up for y'all so that way some people who don't know what they are, the Stryker vehicle. There's a lot of modifications to this thing, but it's a really interesting little armored vehicle here. There's the M1128, the LAV-AD. They've done a whole bunch of stuff with this. Here's like an LAV. That's not an LAV-AD. Sorry, correction. That's not that. Then there's an M128. They've produced a couple hundred of each of these things, but they're very neat and they're very cool. And I have to say that I'm a big fan of them. They look really cool. But performance-wise, I don't really know much about them. I just know about their appearance, and they look pretty neat. So I thank you very much for the support and sharing that info with us. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one goes to Bo Ross, who says, this channel will be discussed in media courses of the future. Moment in history when citizen journalists surpassed news machines in detail and coverage.
Oh, thank you very much for the high praise there. I don't really think what I do is extraordinary. You know, I'm just one guy doing this pretty much on my own. And, you know, I get help from, like, Matthew with compiling the questions and stuff. But as far as the research right now, I do this entirely on my own. And so I thank you so much for putting me at a level beyond multi-million-dollar media companies that have hundreds of people working for them and compiling the news and the scripts and all that stuff. I thank you so much for putting me on such a high pedestal. That's really an honor, and I thank you once again. And thank you very much for the support. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quickly, I want to recognize a donation that just came in from General Ralph HD for $20. Thank you, General Ralph. That's very generous of you, and we do appreciate it. And let's see here. Next up, we have a question from Vardman Jane, who says, "Keep up the good work. Thanks to Enforcer and the mods."
And I thank you so much for the support. Me and the small team of mods I now have on the stream work tirelessly on stream to make sure that things run. And then we have people in the background who make sure that things run on the Discord and so on. And so I thank you so much for helping support us all. It means a lot to me. And I thank you so much for that. And so with that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And the next question is from a longtime channel supporter, That Frost Wolf. They say, "The Ukrainians take their grenades. The Ruskies receive toy squeakers. Love to see it. Slava Ukraine."
Slava Ukraina. And thank you for the neat little joke. I like that one. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have another one from Knuckles. He says, "Just checked and Ukraine officially denied responsibility. What's your thoughts on that?"
I mean, like, that's a really hard thing for them to say because the evidence was clear and undeniable. I mean, like, all this here, except, yeah, all of it actually, is all footage of that attack happening. And you could see the Ukrainian helicopters flying away. And so I think they're doing that now, and they kind of, like, weighed the political stance, and they're like, ew, what if this makes the talks fall apart? And so they said, yeah, we're just going to deny it, and hopefully that doesn't make things go bad in the talks. Maybe that's what they're doing, but then again, that's nothing but assumptions. Maybe it was a Russian false flag, but as far as I know, and the information that we saw, it was very clear that the Ukrainians did it from all the information provided. And so I thank you very much for the info and bringing that up. But I'm still going to stick with my guns and say it was a Ukrainian thing, and I think they're just denying it for political and diplomatic reasons at the moment. But I thank you very much once again, Knuckles, for the continued support. And so with that, we're moving on to the next question.
And guess what? Who's up next? Knuckles again. He says, "To go along with the other guy, if Russia was to go all out in the air, would it overload? And while a lot would be shot down, it would be chaos."
I do have to agree, but the thing is that you always have to remember that air targets, well, aircraft in general, are incredibly precious, and they're very hard to replace now. Most countries only operate a few thousand, well, most of the large countries, you know, like Russia, at least on paper, operate several thousand aircraft, and losing even like 200 of them is a huge loss, because usually aircraft are produced in batches now, and they will never be replaced, so a loss is permanent. So I thank you very much for the support, and I think that if the Russians start using their entire air force, that would do really no good for them, and it would be just bad news, really, in the end. But I thank you very much for the support. That's kind of my input on it. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another question from BC Skyman, who says, "I'm a member of a Slavic church in Atlanta, and all Russian people there hate this war, and we even have friends that are Russians fighting for Ukraine."
Well, I'm very glad that you know Russians who have taken it upon themselves to fight against the evil Russian government. And so, thank you for sharing that info with us and actually letting us know what some Russian Americans think about the war. So thank you very much once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Vardman Jane, who says, is it likely that some of the money from all the seizures will be used for funding the recovery? Any chance that Russia can be made to pay directly?
I don't think Russia will ever be made to pay directly. That would be something that the Ukrainians would get if they won. That would be like war reparations in a way. But I do believe that the seized assets in Western countries will most likely be sent to Ukraine to help them rebuild. That's something that I've discussed a decent bit. It's a commonly asked question, but it is a good question that's on everyone's minds. And I do think that they will be sent to Ukraine to help them rebuild. And the amount of money that we've heard that has been seized, especially by the Swiss who have frozen all Russian assets in their bank accounts, would definitely go a very long way in helping Ukraine rebuild their country to the point it would be on par with Poland, which is a pretty developed country at this point, in as far as European terms go. So I thank you very much for the question. I hope that answers it in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And just real quick, the same person, Vardman Jane, sent in one more super chat, which I'll read real quick. They say, gentle reminder to consider the Ukrainians run nonprofit for tomorrow's fundraiser. Nova Ukraine is the name.
Got you. And if Matthew could put down a note for that, we will look into it. We're kind of a little set right now on the fundraiser that we will be running, but we will check into that one and see if it does have an EIN number and look into it. And if that one seems better, we will go with it. And so I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question up is Knuckles once again. He puts in another donation of $5 and says, multiple Russian 3M 54 caliber cruise missile hitting Odessa now, hitting fuel depots and military positions as we speak. There is lots of smoke over Odessa right now.
Interesting. I wonder if that's suggestive of an impending naval invasion on the area. But we'll just have to wait and see if that's something that the Russians now try and conduct. I believe that it wouldn't be in their advantage to do that because it appeared that the capture of Mykolaiv was important to their plans in the southern area of the coastline. So we'll just have to wait and see if that is indicative of a naval invasion. But I thank you very much for the support, Knuckles, and sharing that information with us. And we will look into it and see if it is true. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And at this point, we have 2 more super chat questions to read and just a couple of donations to get to and mention. And then we'll move on to our other questions. So next up, we have one from James Morris, who says, Zelensky's close advisor, Polodiak, said Russians will dig in the Donbass and south, hoping for a win or at least stalemate. Do you see it in this way?
I don't think that, I mean, like, they may try to dig in and make some kind of stalemate, but we can see that that didn't work for them near Kyiv because they started to dig in up there and try and force a stalemate, and then we saw that that didn't even change the situation for them at all. So while they may try to dig in, I don't think that that's actually going to force any kind of stalemate, and the Ukrainians will just sweep them aside and just start pushing them back mile by mile every day. So that's kind of my input on it. I think that may be something that they will try and do, but I'm sure that it won't really be met with much success at this point because we've seen them try and do that in other places around the country, and it hasn't done them well at all. And so that's kind of my input on it based off the information that we have. And so I hope that answers that question in a way. And thank you so much for the support once again. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And our last super chat question goes to Anthony K. Smith, who says, Enforcer, my friend is in Kherson and says the Ukrainians are not yet in the city, but the fighting is now very close. It's probably just a matter of days.
I do have to agree. We've been trying to track that news as best as possible, but not a lot has been coming out. And so I have assumed that it will be maybe a week before it falls or earlier. And so I thank you very much for sharing that information from someone who is in Kherson who can confirm that. And so thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the questions from the chat. We're going to take about 3 of them, and then we're also going to recognize all the supporters who left a super chat after the cutoff, or just left a super chat with no question, and then we're going to move on to 3 from the normal live chat.
Okay, and just to recognize those names, we have one from Jeff Emery. We have a donation from Kevin Briggs. Also another one from Jeff Emery. We also have a donation from Igna0101. Also one from Tito McLovin and a viewer named Tumaru. If you did send in a comment with your super chat here recently after the cutoff, unfortunately we will have to put a pause on reading those so that way we can get to our other questions tonight as well, because we are running quite late into the stream tonight. So to get to our other questions, just a moment. So we have a question here from a longtime channel supporter, Diogo Jose Texera da Silva, who says, Enforcer, why is Germany continuing to purchase natural gas from Russia?
Germany is kind of in a rock and a hard place right now due to decommissioning a large amount of their nuclear power plants, and their renewable energy efforts haven't really been leading them in a direction that's energy independent, which I believe was their goal in doing that. And so they've had to start relying heavily on mining coal inside of their country to run the coal power plants, and also foreign imported oil to make sure that they can run the rest of their power grid. And so Germany is stuck in a spot right now that if they shut off Russian oil, their power grid will collapse. And so they have to keep on importing it so that way they can make sure that their country doesn't go through a literal dark time. So that's kind of like the stance and kind of like the direction that the Germans are in right now, and why they keep on importing Russian oil. Really, the answer is they can't stop, because if they do, they're going to be in a very bad situation. So I hope that answers the question. And I mean, like, it's a terrible situation the Germans put themselves in, and I don't know why they did that. I mean, it was a bad call. But anyways, I thank you very much for the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And the next question is from the Vicious Tuna, who says, Enforcer, is it true that many Russian troops near Chernobyl weren't even told about the nuclear disaster or the radiation danger?
As far as we know, yes, because they dug in the Red Forest, which was the most irradiated part of the zone, and then they suffered radiation sickness, and then the Russians literally just pulled them all out of there. Like, they pulled out some of them that got sick, and then like a day or two later, they said, okay, now all of y'all are leaving. We're just going to hand this back over to Ukraine. And then after that, all the Russian soldiers left the Northern Front entirely, which was weird. But yeah, that is the case. I think that they didn't know at all, because what Dumbo would know about radiation sickness and such, and the radiation inside the zone, and then dig in it? That's just silly. That's goofy. I mean, like, not even the dumbest people in the United States would probably pull that stuff. So I think that those people didn't even know about the radiation inside the zone. And so I thank you very much for the question. It was a good one. And a lot of people have been asking about the Chernobyl zone. And that's kind of my stance on the Russian soldiers and what they did in there right now. And so with that, we're going to move on to our last question of the night.
And our lucky viewer who the last question of the night goes to is Shannon Trailer, who says, Enforcer, is that a smart move for the Ukraine military to bomb Russia during peace talks? Or what does that mean for them in the future?
I think that it may be a somewhat smart move, although it looks like the Ukrainians are taking the stance that maybe it wasn't. But in my opinion, it was a kind of smart move, because it starts putting pressure on the Russians and showing them that you can't keep on tailoring the story to tell Russians what's going on in a foreign land. We're going to bring the war to Russia and let them see how poorly it's going, because we're actually going to be able to conduct raids into Russia and no one can stop us. And so I think that that's kind of my stance on what happened in Russia and the attacks, and it may actually impact the peace talks in a way. I'm not entirely sure how, but that is something that would usually make peace talks fall apart. But then again, in the Israeli War of Independence, I gave that example, that actually sped up the peace talks a lot. It was bombing an airport in the middle of kind of like the near end of the war. So I hope that's answered the question in a way, and with that, we have reached the end of the stream for tonight. I thank y'all all so much for showing up. I hope I've answered everyone's questions really well, and y'all got a lot out of this news. We saw huge developments today, and I'm still excited over the whole entire Northern Front pretty much collapsing over the last 24 hours. That is huge news, and I can't wait to see what the Ukrainians will be doing tomorrow. So stay tuned, because we will be running a fundraiser tomorrow on the usual stream at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, where we will have a fundraiser up, and we will try and give them as much support as possible and continue all the good work and help that everyone in this channel does to help out. So I thank you so much once again for the support. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to Ukraine tomorrow as in the fundraiser. So thank you very much once again, and I'll see y'all all tomorrow. Take care.